Jian Wushuang finally had peace in Saint's tomb as everyone tried to stay out of his way. He also appeared uninterested in the fights for position tokens which were going on intensely. Time was ticking away. The fight for position tokens finally came to an end. Little brother, junior brother Wushuang, Zhuobing, Lingdan, Zhongyi, Sutong, the other disciples of Ancient Star Temple, and Narcissus Island returned from the outer area, appearing before Jian Wushuang. Little brother, I heard that you single-handedly wiped out nearly 50 first-class divine demons. Even Huan Chen, Long Zishan, Huiyang, and Yu Aoqing, who are part of the 12 minor kings, were forced to crush their safety tokens and leave Saint's tomb. Did you hurt yourself? Zhuobing kept checking Jian Wushuang out repeatedly but did not see any discomfort in Jian Wushuang. Although they stayed out of the battle in the outer area, they maintained communication with the outside world. Therefore, they knew about Jian Wushuang's killings in the inner area. It's okay. I'm good. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly. He was a killer demon in front of outsiders, but he played the role of a younger brother in front of his elder sister. Junior brother Wushuang, Zhongyi, Sutong, and others looked at Jian Wushuang with incomparable complex expressions on their faces. All of them had received a message from Elder Lingyi and learned the decision Narcissus Island made. Jian Wushuang was no longer a disciple of Narcissus Island. Hence, he was no longer their junior brother. Senior brother Zhongyi and senior sister Sutong, although I'm no longer a disciple of Narcissus Island, we have somehow fought side by side, so you are still my seniors. Jian Wushuang smiled politely. Hearing that, Zhongyi and Sutong felt relaxed. They could not violate decisions made by the higher-ups of Narcissus Island. But that decision did not hinder their friendship with Jian Wushuang. That's right. Jian Wushuang suddenly flipped his hand and a white token immediately appeared in his palm. That white token was a position token for viewing the Fengtian scroll and being enlightened in the process. Junior brother Wushuang, this is? Sutong and Lingdan looked over immediately. Zhuobing and Zhongyi each had a token. Both Sutong and Lingdan, who still had none, were keen to get one. I got this token from that Long Zishan, replied Jian Wushuang with a smile. Position tokens were exclusively available only in Saint's tomb. It would remain in the tomb even when Long Zishan left. That token fell into Jian Wushuang's hands when he defeated Long Zishan. I have a token in my hand. Senior brother Lingdan and senior sister Sutong, both of you can discuss whom to take this. Jian Wushuang threw the token in his hand and could care less about what happened next. Both Lingdan and Sutong started their discussion. They soon came to a consensus. The position token was given to Lingdan. In exchange, Lingdan owed Sutong a favor in which Sutong could ask Lingdan to do something for her in the future. Lingdan wanted to owe Jian Wushuang a favor. Unfortunately, Lingdan knew that Jian Wushuang would not need anything from him. It's almost time. Let's get ready to go, announced Jian Wushuang. Zhuobing, Lingdan, and Zhongyi, who each held a position token, nodded. The four of them found a place and sat down before beginning to adjust their state of mind. An hour passed in a flash. Rumbling, the heavens above abruptly roared and there was a change in heaven and earth. A huge picture scroll appeared in the uppermost void. It's here. Jian Wushuang and those few people were overwhelmed in excitement. Fengtian scroll had always appeared in the tomb's most central void so that everyone could see it. However, only those who had position tokens could get enlightenment from the Fengtian scroll. As for those who did not have a token, they would not be able to get anything out from their Fengtian scroll observation. The three of you have a good time in the enlightenment process. I'll protect all of you from your surroundings and won't let anyone disturb you. Sutong, along with the disciples from Ancient Star Temple and Narcissus Island, stayed nearby to protect Jian Wushuang and the others. Truthfully, they did not need to be protected. That was the rule of Saint's tomb. Disciples could freely contest for the position tokens, but once the Fengtian scroll was out, no one could disturb the disciples who had position tokens when they were in the process of observing the Fengtian scroll. Otherwise, Crimson Stone Saint will immediately kill the troublemaker. The saint's tomb was controlled by Crimson Stone Saint, and no one dared to break the rules set by an undying saint, even if the saint had passed away. Jian Wushuang held the white token in his hand and closed his eyes as his consciousness assimilated with the white token. Under the white token's guidance, Jian Wushuang's consciousness went into the Fengtian scroll, which was spread open in the void above. The huge Fengtian scroll had light spots all over it. Those light spots were moving around slowly on the scroll, like very dazzling stars. The stars were connected, forming a magnificent picture scroll. So, this is the Fengtian scroll? It's called Fengtian. I wonder what's in this picture scroll. With a hint of curiosity, Jian Wushuang began to examine it carefully. After a short momentary observation, Jian Wushuang found the mystery in Fengtian scroll. Is this the cosmic mysteries? Jian Wushuang was electrified. He could sense a special peerless power in the Fengtian scroll. This power was neither law nor originated from heaven and earth but the mysterious cosmic mysteries. It was not something that can be found and experienced normally, not because it was magnificent or overimposing. On the contrary, it was not as profound as the laws of heaven and earth. Nonetheless, its presence was infinitesimal, just like the pores on a human's body. Although the pores were inconspicuous, they were indispensable. That was the mysterious power of heaven and earth's vast expanse. It was one of the main elements that constituted heaven and earth but was not studied because of it being weak and subtle. What Jian Wushuang sensed in the Fengtian scroll was the mysterious powers of the vast heaven and earth. As Jian Wushuang was achieving enlightenment, he subconsciously began to picture some sword techniques in his mind. The mysterious power evolved accordingly. Jian Wushuang was thrilled in just a brief moment. So, that's how it is? Jian Wushuang finally understood the functions of Fengtian scroll. It was through its mysterious power that one derived various things between heaven and earth. For example, it was used to develop sword techniques, derive laws, secret techniques, etc. It worked in many areas and the effect was many times faster than that of self-deduction. Deduced. In the swordsmanship test on the 8th trial bridge, I had a breakthrough in my understanding of sword principle and achieved profound sword principle realm. My sword skills have improved. I have created heaven and earth aligned during the battle with those genius disciples, but that was not all I'm capable of. Fengtian scroll is a great tool for me to deduce swordsmanship using the mysterious cosmic mysteries. The third style of spacetime sword technique. The third style of transmigration sword principle. Among the two major laws of spacetime and transmigration, my spacetime law level is infinitely close to reaching the first stage. Perhaps through this enlightenment, I would be able to progress and achieve a breakthrough in my apparition techniques. I'm very close to reaching the first stage for transmigration law as well. Jian Wushuang murmured. His consciousness was divided into three at that moment. He was using his consciousnesses to respectively deduce swordsmanship, spacetime law, and transmigration law. It was not an easy task dividing one's consciousness into three and using them separately to deduce three types of knowledge. For this to be done, not only must he have an extremely tenacious and powerful consciousness, but also amazing comprehension capabilities. After all, his comprehension capabilities would be reduced to only 1/3 of his usual with his consciousness divided into three. Under such circumstances, it would normally be less effective compared to concentrating on deducing only one type of knowledge. Therefore, many cultivators, including many geniuses, would not dare go down that road. Yet Jian Wushuang did not hesitate. As a perfect chaotic creature, he had excellent comprehension capabilities. Jian Wushuang was in full concentration mode and indulged himself in Fengtian Scroll's enlightenment process. Zhuobing, Lingdan, and Zhongyi, who were next to him, also did the same. No one would be willing to waste this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They would seize this time to improve their powers as much as possible. In the hidden and independent space, Crimson Stone Saint casually stood there but cast his eyes on Jian Wushuang from time to time. He did not bother giving his attention to the other geniuses. I went through a lot to get hold of just this one scroll and was miserably hunted down such that even my death was related to this Fengtian scroll. What an advantage to this brat, murmured Crimson Stone Saint. He knew very well the merits of Fengtian scroll. A single scroll may be of little use to him who had reached the level of Undying Saint. But the Fengtian scroll would be of tremendous help for gods who were below the undying saint cultivation level, especially for those divine demons who were in Saint's tomb. The tomb was opened many times in the past, and many disciples had gained a lot of benefit through the process of enlightenment when they looked at the Fengtian scroll every single time. Jian Wushuang is so talented. I wonder how much improvement he will have after meditating upon this Fengtian scroll. Crimson Stone Saint had very high expectations for Jian Wushuang. Time very slowly went by as Jian Wushuang and the rest meditated. Fengtian scroll was only available for 10 days each time it was opened up, and those 10 days slipped away in the blink of an eye. As soon as the time was up, the huge scroll in the void above immediately folded up, melted away, and disappeared. Zhuobing, Lingdan, and Zhongyi had also regained their consciousness on that hill. Ha! Lingdan let out a breath as he opened up his eyes, which were filled with happiness. It was obvious that he had gained a lot during his 10 days of meditation. Junior sister, have you gained a lot? Lingdan walked up to Zhuobing. I've benefited a lot. It was comparable to about 10 years or even decades of hard work. Most importantly, I'll no longer have any obstacles on my path to achieve peak divine demon realm. After absorbing the divine powers from the divine power ocean, I should be able to make a breakthrough to the peak divine demon realm after returning to Ancient Star Temple, said Zhuobing with a wide grin. Really? Congratulations, junior sister. Lingdan congratulated Zhuobing. Both of you seem to have gained a lot. Zhongyi, who joined them, was also beaming widely. Brother Zhongyi, I'm sure that you have gained no less than us, said Lingdan with a smile. The three of them exchanged brief greetings before all of them looked at Jian Wushuang, who was next to them. That Fengtian scroll is gone. Yet junior brother Wushuang is still meditating? Zhongyi exclaimed in surprise. Brother Wushuang should have gotten some enlightenment. Let's just wait here and not disturb him, said Lingdan. The three of them waited until Jian Wushuang, who had been sitting cross-legged, finally opened his eyes. Jian Wushuang soon joined the three of them. Little brother, how do you feel? Zhuobing asked. Not bad. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly. Of course, he was just being modest. Zhuobing, Lingdan, and Zhongyi had tremendous gains after 10 days of meditation. Jian Wushuang should have gotten a lot more since he had stronger comprehension capabilities compared to the three of them. Besides, he was deducing 3 types of knowledge: swordsmanship, spacetime law, and transmigration law at the same time. The insights he gained after 10 days in those 3 aspects exceeded his expectations. He had made advancements by leaps and bounds. I understand now why those genius disciples paid so much attention to the Fengtian scroll viewing position tokens and even fought for it with their lives, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. Even he had to admit that the Fengtian scroll had greatly helped him to an extent that tantamounts to a great deal of luck. Luck and opportunities were greatly sought after by the masses. After Fengtian scroll, divine power ocean should be next, Jian Wushuang murmured with his eyes gleaming with excitement. Divine power ocean was the most common opportunity available in Saint's tomb. The purple amulets needed to enter the divine power ocean were easier to obtain. Hence, almost everyone could get into the ocean and spent time there. However, Jian Wushuang's expectation towards the divine power ocean was only second to the enlightenment of the Fengtian scroll. That opportunity came on time, especially when he was being targeted by those experts from other sects outside the tomb. It was likely those experts would dash up to him once he exited the tomb. Besides first-class divine demons, there were also a large number of peak divine demons. Jian Wushuang could not handle the mob with his current strength. Therefore, there was only one way out if Jian Wushuang hoped to survive this crisis on his own. That was to get into the divine power ocean and absorb the divine powers in there to enhance the divine powers within his body and break through to the divine demon realm. Once he achieved the divine demon realm, he would be a truly complete, perfect, chaotic creature, which would help him fend off the crisis that was waiting for him outside. Fengtian scroll didn't disappoint me. I hope that the divine power ocean will also not let me down. Jian Wushuang was electrified and had unconsciously clasped his hands together. Boom! The earth trembled and suddenly cracked open. The ground sank at an astonishing speed right in the middle of the tomb's inner area as majestic divine powers surged out wildly from the sunken ground. In just a few moments, an infinite ocean of divine powers was formed. Many genius disciples who were still staying in the tomb noticed changes on the ground. Has it started? The disciples were thrilled. For those disciples who were only at second-class divine demon realm, they had limited opportunities in the tomb. They had no hope of fighting for the position tokens. Likewise, their chances to pass through any of the tests at the Abyss of Trials were also slim. Under those circumstances, they could only try their luck. And the only opportunity achievable within their means was the Divine Power Ocean. That's the Divine Power Ocean. Let's go there quickly, said Ling Dan. Those people from Ancient Star Temple, Narcissus Island, and Jian Wushuang immediately went forth. They soon arrived in the middle of the inner area and found the grounds of the huge area had disappeared only to be replaced by a vast divine power ocean. They could sense the ancient god divine power surging powerfully within the ocean. This is the divine power ocean. Its divine power is immense. How generous of Crimson Stone Saint! I've never experienced such intense ancient god divine power in my life. Ling Dan, Zhuo Bing, and the others expressed their admiration at the sight of the ocean. Even Jian Wushuang was startled when he saw the divine power ocean. Every single drop of ancient god divine power contained pure and authentic divine powers which were extremely useful to cultivators. One of the bounty rewards for Jian Wushuang was 10,000 drops of ancient god divine power. 10,000 drops were not a small amount. Many powerful peak divine demons were unable to deliver that much power. However, that was merely a drop in an ocean compared to the divine power ocean which laid in front of their eyes. The ancient god divine power drops within must be astronomical in such a huge ocean. This could only be delivered by Crimson Stone Saint who had reached the Undying Saint level. As for other people, even with hellacious efforts by several prominent sects in Wuxia wilderness like the Great Compassion sect, it was unlikely for them to have accumulated even 1% of the ocean's divine powers. The rule of Saint's Tomb states that whoever owns purple amulets can enter this divine power ocean to absorb as much ancient god divine power as possible. It depends on our abilities to absorb the powers within, but we are not allowed to take divine powers out from the tomb. No one dared to violate this rule. After all, Crimson Stone Saint's consciousness might be secretly observing our behavior, said Ling Dan. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly but immediately asked, "Do all of you have enough purple amulets? I have a lot here if you need them." With a simple wave of his hand, dozens of purple amulets appeared. Jian Wushuang had fought many genius disciples. Whether those disciples were killed or fled the tomb with their safety tokens, they could not take those purple amulets with them. Naturally, those purple amulets were left behind and fell into Jian Wushuang's hands. Although Jian Wushuang previously gave some of the purple amulets to Ice Fire God Palace disciples, he still had a lot left. According to the rules, one purple amulet was equivalent to a pass to stay in the Divine Power Ocean for 1 month. Jian Wushuang had enough purple amulets for him to stay in the ocean for several years or even up to a decade. He certainly did not need so many of them. The disciples of Ancient Star Temple and Narcissus Island were delighted by his offer. They did not hesitate to take some of those purple amulets from Jian Wushuang. "Let's get started," said Zhongyi. They wasted no time and directly plunged into the vast ocean one after another. As soon as they got into the Divine Power Ocean, they could feel the strong current of ancient god divine powers approaching from all directions. That's a lot of divine powers. It's enough for all of us to take in as much as we can. Those disciples were excited as they got started and began absorbing and refining the ancient god divine powers around them, each working with different techniques. Jian Wushuang was among those disciples in the ocean. He wore a smile on his face as he felt the inexhaustible ancient god divine powers from his surroundings. "In fact, I've achieved the divine demon realm a long time ago. What's lacking is the accumulation of divine powers, and now I have such an immense ancient god divine power in front of me. Let's start." Jian Wushuang also did not waste any more time. The pores all over his body were completely opened as a terrifying suction force instantly emerged from him. Wham! The wild power surges swirled around Jian Wushuang in sloshing chaos. An infinite amount of ancient god divine powers closed in around Jian Wushuang under the influence of his suction power. Jian Wushuang absorbed and refined them at an astounding speed. He was working at a speed that was 10 times faster than any first or second-class divine demons that were present. Zhuobing, Lingdan, and the others who were around Jian Wushuang were also focusing on absorbing as much divine power as possible. However, all of them looked over at Jian Wushuang and they noticed the rapid current movement around him. The speed. My goodness! What a terrifying speed! Usually, the higher one's cultivation level, the faster one could absorb and refine divine power. That doesn't seem to be applicable to Brother Wushuang. Even though I am a first-class divine demon, my speed is merely 1/10 of Brother Wushuang. He must be a monster. The disciples of Ancient Star Temple and Narcissus Island were amazed by Jian Wushuang's abilities. They had been taken aback countless times by the abilities and performance of Jian Wushuang since entering Saint's Tomb. Therefore, they were not surprised by Jian Wushuang being able to absorb and refine divine power dozens of times faster than themselves. With the speed which he's working with, we'll only be distracted if we stay too close to him. Let's go somewhere else and leave this area for Junior Brother Wushuang, suggested Zhong Yi. All of them nodded in unison. The divine power ocean was huge and they had only been in a small part of it. They would not be affected if everyone around them was absorbing at similar speeds. However, Jian Wushuang was absorbing so fast that none of them could match his pace. The divine powers would be attracted over to his side, which would greatly affect the other disciples around the area. They had no choice but to move to other areas. The atmosphere had considerably calmed down in Saint's Tomb. The various sects' genius disciples were indulging in the divine power ocean and absorbing as much divine power as possible. The day slowly passed and soon it had been 3 months. 2 silhouettes stood next to each other on the edge of the vast divine power ocean. Congratulations, Junior Brother, on your breakthrough to first-class divine demon realm, said a smiling young man with long purple hair. Haha, that was pure luck. I was only 1 step away from first-class divine demon realm. When I tried to overcome one of the trial bridges tests, I learned something and met the requirements for a breakthrough. What I lacked were some divine powers. I've been absorbing a fair bit of divine power for the last 3 months. Hence, I attempted a breakthrough to the first-class divine demon realm and made it. The chubby young man smiled heartily. The divine power ocean was very useful. Besides the accumulation of divine powers, one could also attempt a breakthrough in one's cultivation bottleneck by absorbing a large amount of divine power. However, such breakthroughs were only applicable to first-class divine demons or lower. After all, the highest level that could be admitted into Saint's Tomb was first-class divine demons. Hence, first-class divine demons were unable to progress to peak divine demon realm in the tomb, but second-class divine demons could try advancing into the first-class divine demon realm. The chubby young man took advantage of the divine power ocean and easily achieved first-class divine demon realm. Both of them were chit-chatting casually while walking as they passed the area where Jian Wushuang was. The strong turbulence waves around Jian Wushuang caught their attention. That absorption power is really quick and the waters around are choppy. Both of them stopped in their tracks, looked over, and immediately spotted Jian Wushuang, who was in that area. It's him. It's the monstrous Jian Wushuang. No wonder. A trace of fear flashed in their eyes. They had seen Jian Wushuang's mass killings with their own eyes. All the various sects' genius disciples in the tomb had developed tremendous fear for Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's divine power absorption speed is too fast. If he has been going on at this pace for the past 3 months, then he must have acquired an incredible amount of divine power. It's strange he hasn't broken through yet. He's obviously still in the chaotic realm, isn't he? Both of them were flabbergasted. Let him be. Jian Wushuang is indeed a large monstrous freak. Let's not stay here, said the purple long-haired young man. Yes, let's move along. The two dared not delay and escaped as quickly as possible. They would not have been so frightened if they met someone else. Before Jian Wushuang was already recognized as the Grim Reaper of the tomb and offended countless sections. Under such circumstances, Jian Wushuang might just kill them without any scruples if they rubbed him the wrong way. After the two left, Jian Wushuang remained there and continued absorbing the ancient god divine powers. Exactly as what the two had seen, Jian Wushuang had been absorbing the ancient god divine power at lightning speeds for 3 months. Apparently, an ordinary chaotic realm would probably reach the upper limit in 3 days, but Jian Wushuang was different. He was a perfect chaotic creature whereby his divine powers were limitless. He needed a large volume of divine power to advance from the peak chaotic realm to divine demon realm. Hence, he definitely needed more divine power as compared to an ordinary peak chaotic realm. After insanely absorbing for 3 months, he had finally reached his power accumulation limit. At that point, Jian Wushuang stopped absorbing the divine powers around him. Jian Wushuang was stoked. I've reached the limit in power accumulation, and there's no possibility of any further improvement. It's time for a breakthrough. Rumbling, the boundless divine powers circulated frantically in Jian Wushuang's body, forming a surging stream of divine power. Under careful control, the stream of divine power pushed through the bottleneck in Jian Wushuang's body. The bottleneck was tough. There was a huge gap between the chaotic realm and divine demon realm. Therefore, it was extremely difficult for a breakthrough from the chaotic realm to divine demon realm, as the requirements were extremely hard to meet. Nonetheless, for Jian Wushuang, he had made his breakthrough and reached the divine demon's realm in his previous life. He was just reincarnated to once again go through his cultivation. He had fulfilled the requirements for advancement to the divine demon realm. Not only did he fulfill the requirements, but had actually surpassed it long ago. What he lacked was just divine powers. The divine powers in his body had also reached the breakthrough requirements, and the divine power ocean around him could continuously channel support for his breakthrough. Jian Wushuang was completely confident with his breakthrough. Boom! 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 The stream of divine power continuously battered the bottleneck's barrier. The stream of divine power collapsed after every single attack launched, but Jian Wushuang immediately mustered a new stream for the next attack. In the blink of an eye, Jian Wushuang had already launched nearly 10 waves of attacks towards the barrier. A crack finally appeared on the extremely tough barrier. A small leak would sink a great ship. The appearance of a small crack had rocked that barrier's stability. There were 2 more waves of attack next. Rumbling, the barrier had given way. Divine Demon Realm. Here I come. Jian Wushuang was over the top. Divine Demon Realm was the peak of his previous life's cultivation level. Similarly, that level was the starting point for a perfect chaotic creature. With Jian Wushuang's breakthrough, the infinite divine power ran through every corner of his body, and Jian Wushuang's heart experienced a euphoric moment. That was the enlivened feeling of transformation and advancement. He could feel every cell in his body transcending, which greatly improved his life rating. Boom! Without warning, an extremely unique and transcendent pressure emerged from Jian Wushuang. The pressure did not come from a person's strength or aura, but from his life rating. The pressure erupted from Jian Wushuang, and within moments it had covered everywhere across the 9 heavens and 10 domains. Endless waves repetitively stirred up in the divine power ocean and rolled towards Jian Wushuang. However, none of those waves had really crashed upon Jian Wushuang. It was as if the divine power ocean had a soul and submitted itself at Jian Wushuang's feet. Divine power ocean was seemingly worshipping Jian Wushuang. In the divine power ocean, many sect disciples were still there to absorb divine powers. Suddenly, with a loud boom, the terrifying life rating pressure instantly spread and covered every disciple in the ocean. All the disciples in the ocean drew their breath and raised their heads one by one in horror, staring at the pressure source. What is that? What's going on? I feel my soul is about to burst. Numerous cries of terror sounded one after another. If one could easily withstand the oppressive aura of a cultivator, they had a strong character and perseverance to resist, but it was impossible to resist the pressure from life ratings. Jian Wushuang was the second perfect chaotic creature born between heaven and earth and had become the one and only. His life rating was higher than everyone else. No one was capable of resisting the pressure from his life rating. In the divine power ocean, many genius sect disciples were groaning. They were looking toward the direction where Jian Wushuang was and could not help but worship him with a trembling heart. That action was done against their wills as their bodies had betrayed them and were beyond their control. That direction. That's where little brother is. Zhuobing cast her eyes over at the pressure source as she quivered. It's indeed where junior brother Wushuang is. What exactly happened to junior brother Wushuang? Ling Dan, Zhongyi, Sutong, and the others were at a loss. Nevertheless, they were unable to find out as they were also unable to move their bodies. In the hidden independent space of the tomb. Who the hell is he? What kind of a monster is he? What's going on with this pressure? The Crimson Stone Saint was completely struck in awe. His expression was horrified and blank as he stared at Jian Wushuang. Even he could feel a sense of fear that rose from the deepest part of his soul under the intense pressure. He was also unable to move his body. The life rating pressure was overwhelming even to Crimson Stone Saint. It was not something that he could overcome. However, what appeared even more unbelievable to him as that life rating pressure kept rising and becoming more powerful. The pressure quickly got out of Crimson Stone Saint's control, covering the entire tomb, and soon rushed out of Saint's tomb. On the glade outside the Saint's tomb, experts from various sects, including those genius disciples who had crushed their safety token and came out in advance, remained to wait. Everyone was waiting for their genius disciples to come out of the tomb. More importantly was of course waiting for that one person. That person was none other than Jian Wushuang. The world seemed to be peaceful during the long wait. Suddenly, a loud boom sounded. The pressure originating from the life rating spread out from the tomb and towards the glade. On the glade, expressions of those various sects experts drastically changed under the intense pressure. Who is emitting this pressure? It's so unique. It's obviously not coming from an expert, yet it makes me subservient to it. My heart quivered under the pressure. Who exactly is it? Who emitted that kind of pressure? Is that from an ultimate god or the Crimson Stone Saint? The experts from various sects on the glade rose in an uproar. No one could remain calm under the pressure. Regardless of first-class divine demon or peak divine demon, the pressure touched a soft spot in their hearts and made them want to subconsciously worship it. As the pressure continued increasing and expanding, the thoughts in their hearts became stronger. Their faces changed drastically. At that instant, look up at the heavens. An exclamation came from a peak divine demon expert. Everyone immediately looked above and was shocked. The world up in heaven had changed its color. Thunderclouds billowed from all directions. Thick and deep purple thunderbolts the size of buckets made a rumbling sound. Those deep purple thunderbolts sent everyone who was present down below into shock and shivers. Without warning, two of the dark purple thunderbolts collided. The impact did not produce much movement, but an electric bolt formed and swept down onto the glade down below. Boom! All of a sudden, the vacant piece of land instantly disappeared, leaving only a bottomless pit filled with scorched soil with no traces of vitality left. My goodness! Such power! Even an ultimate god expert would not survive under this thunderstrike. This is the effect of just a fragment of the thunderstrike. The various sects experts on the glade were horrified. The heavens above rumbled as a series of deafening roars sounded one after another. It was the roar of heaven and earth. The heavens was bellowing in rage. The terrifying pressure went crashing down and was about to annihilate everything completely. That's heaven's will. The pressure of heaven's will. A hysterical voice emerged from above the plane. The experts of the various sects reacted immediately. Yes, it is heaven's will. This kind of pressure must be from heaven's will. Who is it? Who the hell is causing heaven's will to make its presence? Who had violated the way of heaven? Who the hell is it? Countless experts bellowed. Heaven's will was in control of the heavens. It was the supreme power in heaven and earth. According to legends, in the early days of the ancient god realm, whenever something that could pose a certain threat and affect the cycle of the heavens emerged, the heavens' will would make its presence to suppress that threat completely. It was to ensure that the heavens could continue its cycle in a proper manner. Then again, it was merely a legend. In reality, who on earth had the abilities to tip the balance of heaven and earth? or worse, to affect the cycle of the heavens? It was impossible, entirely impossible. Even if there was, perhaps there would be only one or two in hundreds of millions of years. What was happening right before their eyes were clearly influenced by heaven's will. No one had seen such a momentum before. The divine demon experts present submitted themselves quietly and hung their heads low under heaven's will. They could only grumble and complain in their hearts. Who the hell went against heaven's will? Who the hell had the abilities to cause heaven's will to make its presence? There was an upheaval outside Saint's tomb. The uncontestable heavens will encircled in the void above, with its willpower shockingly getting stronger and stronger. The sex experts on the glade were speechless and horrified. At the same time, the world went through some drastic changes. In an ordinary city within Wuxia wilderness, a bearded white-haired old man dressed in plain green robes was slowly walking barefooted on the streets. That old man who went through the vicissitudes of life was holding a canvas in his hand. The canvas had characters written on it which said, "Psychic" and "Fortune-telling." As if the old man could sense the drastic changes in the heavens above, he paused in his steps and looked up into heaven. Finally a breakthrough? Ha ha! The barefooted white-haired old man heartily laughed with a hint of surprise in his insane laughter. Fortunately, the city was quite deserted and there were only a few people on the streets. No one cared about that barefooted white-haired old man. The barefooted white-haired old man restrained himself from laughing and his eyes displayed melancholy. "Old friend, you really did it. It finally paid off to wait for you for so many years. Go with a peace of mind and leave the rest to me," the barefooted white-haired old man murmured with his slightly bloodshot iris. The white-haired and barefooted old man then slowly raised his head and old wrinkly palm, pointing to the direction where Saint's tomb was located. His pointing finger seems lifeless. Only a vague golden light shot out from the tip of his finger. The old man was clearly more than 100 million miles away from the tomb, but the golden light appeared in the next moment between heaven and earth outside the tomb. Over there, heaven's will was bombarding the area in a frantic manner. A golden light descended from afar right in the middle of the chaotic will of heavenly way. The golden light formed a golden vortex before mercilessly swallowing the thunderclouds floating around the heavens, the terrifying-looking dark purple thunderbolts, and the endless will of heavenly way. In the blink of an eye, the will of heavenly way in the void was completely swallowed. The golden light dissipated as heaven and earth were restored to its peace once again as if nothing had happened. On the glade down below, the various sex experts were confused. "It's gone. The will of heavenly way disappeared? What was that golden light just now?" Those first-class divine demons and peak divine demons on the glade were in a state of stupor. They had no idea what had happened. The only certainty was the terrifying will of heavenly way was gone. However, the increasing life-rating pressure coming out of the tomb was still going on at crazed speed and did not seem like it was going to end. The ancient god domain was huge. It's incredibly huge. For example, Wuxia wilderness was only a drop in the ocean compared to the huge ancient god domain. Totally inconspicuous. In a wide territory far away from Wuxia wilderness, countless experts had gathered at the core of the ancient god domain. That was the three divine realms. A dojo that stretched far and wide was suspended in the void above with more than 10 million cultivators sitting cross-legged in the center. Those cultivators were of myriad levels with a mixture of powerful and weak ones. Among them were those in the chaotic realm, divine demon realm, ultimate god, and undying saint. Some were even of the highest-ranking undying saints. Regardless of their strength and status, all of them sat there with humility and held their breath as they watched the person on the high platform in front. That man was a bald man clothed in white robes, and he was smiling. The bald man was barefooted as he stood there bathed under the sun. White lights were glowing from his body, giving off a relaxed impression like a gentle breeze blowing on one's face. He sat there and casually spoke, but each of his words contained a magical power that made those more than 10 million divine demons gathered below intoxicated. He was preaching to the more than 10 million cultivators in front of him. Everyone was listening attentively. The white-robed bald man abruptly stopped halfway through. The smile on his face slowly receded as his expression became solemn. All of you, go on and meditate upon what I've taught today." The white-robed bald man finished his sentence before slowly closed his eyes. In a bloodied space, both heaven and earth were covered in bright red. The pungent smell of blood filled the air. Yet a woman stood there calmly. The woman with a beautiful face was like a fairy who came out of a painting and carried herself with a unique aura. She was extremely cold and indifferent. Besides her cold grandeur, the woman carried an absolute sense of pride. Her arrogance was probably because she used to be at the peak of the world. In the void before that cold and beautiful woman was another woman. The other woman wore a veil so her appearance could not be clearly seen, but her body shape was no better than the cold woman. She was fighting with countless cultivators at that moment. At the feet of the veiled woman laid plenty of bodies with blood flowing like streams. No one knew how many cultivators died in the hands of that veiled woman. Suddenly, the cold and beautiful woman who had been watching at the side stirred and slowly shut her eyes. At the same time, in the eternal burning flames, an intimidating devil wearing purple armor was awakened. He looked up at the heaven above but closed his eyes again after a while. A blood-clothed woman in a manor served by countless male servants also closed her eyes. In the chaotic domain, there were no rules and orders, nor were there laws of heaven and earth. There was nothing at all. The only thing available was a dimly lit light. Wham! 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 For figures appeared in the chaotic domain out of thin air. They were the preaching white-robed bald man, the cold and beautiful woman, the purple-armored devil, and the blood-clothed woman. The four of them looked straight at the dimly lit light ahead. An emotionless voice emerged slowly intermittently from the dimly lit light. It was born. Those simple words changed the faces of those four imposing figures. The intermittent voice sounded again. Someone is trying to deceive the heavens. I don't know that person's specific location. Find and destroy it. Only then will the heavenly way survive. The heavenly way, the world, and all beings will die otherwise. After the voice died down, the gray light disappeared. The four imposing figures looked solemn with their hearts shaken. What a surprise! It was indeed born. Someone finally broke the silence on the court, and it was the blood-clothed woman. I thought that Xianxia's plan was nothing but a fantasy and impossible to achieve. But the white-robed bald man seemed pleased. I've belittled him. Now it's useless to talk about that. The top priority is to immediately find and destroy it. The will of Heaven Way mentioned otherwise it will destroy everything in the world, said the purple-armored devil. The will of Heaven Way can sense its existence, but it's a pity that someone had deceived the will of Heaven Way, making the will of Heaven Way confused on its exact location. The ancient god domain is huge. How shall we look for it? The four of them fell silent. Indeed, the ancient god domain was ridiculously huge. They were assuming it, which was just born, should not be strong. It could perhaps just be only a divine demon. Even though the four of them had psychic abilities, it was still impossible to find a divine demon in the vast ancient god domain. It's good if it's in third heaven. However, if it is somewhere outside the third heaven in that endless territory, we'll never be able to find it no matter how influential we are. That's unless it one day sets foot in third heaven and shows its power. Will we be able to track it down and kill it? Said the cold and beautiful woman. In that case, let's just wait. It was born with its own mission. For that mission, it will one day set foot on third heaven, said the purple-armored devil reassuringly. The other two figures nodded in agreement. With that, the four figures disappeared into thin air. On the boundless dojo, the white-robed bald man on the high platform opened his eyes again. He kept that smile on his face and continued preaching. In the eternal burning flames, the purple-armored devil continued his cultivation. In a beautiful manner, the blood-clothed woman continued enjoying the services of her male servants. And in that bloodied space, the cold and beautiful woman slowly waved and called out, "Apprentice!" On the battlefield ahead, countless cultivators responded to her voice and stopped fighting. The veiled woman immediately walked over from the center of the battlefield. "Master," addressed the veiled woman respectfully. "Let me tell you that person has appeared," said the cold and beautiful woman. The veiled woman was shaken by the news as her eyes flashed eagerly with the thirst to kill. "Jian Wushuang," the veiled woman balled up her fists. In Saint's tomb, the various sect's genius disciples were still overwhelmed by shock as what just happened was unheard of. The life-rating pressure which flooded every corner of the tomb finally began to slowly fade away. Those genius disciples breathed sighs of relief when they noticed the pressure was being lifted. On the other hand, the Crimson Stone Saint's complexion was grave and solemn in the hidden independent space. When the pressure had fully subsided, Crimson Stone Saint could move freely once again, and the first thing he did was to wave his hand. There was a loud rumbling noise. A huge space-time wormhole gradually appeared in the void right above the tomb. Big hands appeared then out of thin air in every corner of Saint's tomb next to those genius disciples. The big hands acted fast as it grabbed those disciples and threw them into the space-time wormhole. "Is this a sign for us to leave?" Those disciples quickly got the message. Some of those disciples did not resist and left. There were some disciples who were still in the divine power ocean tried struggling as they wanted to absorb more ancient god divine power, but their struggles were futile. "No, I still have purple amulets. My time's not up yet. How can you send me away? Stop it. Just give me half a month's time. I'll be able to make a breakthrough." Those low groans and moans resounded at every corner of divine power ocean. Yet those big hands did not give them a chance. Those disciples were caught and mercilessly thrown into the wormhole. Those second-class and first-class divine demon struggles were in vain. In just a few moments, all those genius disciples were sent out of Saint's tomb. Zhuobing, Lingdan, Zhongyi, Sutong, and the rest were also included. Jian Wushuang was the only one left in the divine power ocean. A faint black air current condensed on the divine power ocean surface right in front of Jian Wushuang. A vague figure appeared in front of him in the next second. That vague figure was none other than Crimson Stone Saint himself. "Young man." The second time Crimson Stone Saint appeared in front of Jian Wushuang, his expression was completely different from before. The last time he appeared, he looked absolutely confident and aloof. Back then, he thought that no matter how talented Jian Wushuang was, he was only a young chaotic realm brat. Crimson Stone Saint now dismissed that thought. He studied Jian Wushuang, not wanting to miss a micro-expression, but it was a pity that he still failed to see through Jian Wushuang. Besides, Jian Wushuang had already gone through a series of transformations with his soul and body cells elevated to a whole new level. He had successfully transformed into a complete, perfect, chaotic creature. Jian Wushuang's eyelids finally moved as he slowly opened his eyes. The moment his gaze landed on Crimson Stone Saint, the magnificent pressure from his life rating came in full force. Previously, the pressure was swept across all directions, rendering those present in the tomb to worship Jian Wushuang. However, this pressure solely fell on Crimson Stone Saint the second time. Pop! Without any warning, Crimson Stone Saint's knees heavily hit the ocean's surface. An undying saint was forced to kneel down under the pressure. How is this possible? Crimson Stone Saint flushed red as he protested from the bottom of his heart. Although technically, he appeared in the form of consciousness, he was after all still an undying saint. He had experienced some terrifying situations before his death when he was being terrorized and had to give up any idea of resisting or fighting, but he had never been forced to kneel down under any pressures. Never. He was surprised to only find that he could not move at all when he struggled desperately to pull himself up. There were momentary thoughts that perhaps he should kneel down before the person in front of him. On the other hand, the person in front of him was a young man who had just made it into the divine demon realm. The divine power ocean constantly released a volatile divine power. Crimson Stone Saint knelt powerlessly in front of the sitting cross-legged Jian Wushuang. After my breakthrough to the divine demon realm, has my life rating reached such perfection that even an undying saint could not resist it? Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. The life rating pressure was something Jian Wushuang just attained. This kind of exuded pressure had nothing to do with one's cultivation level or strength, but was purely derived from one's life rating. Regardless of how strong the opponent was, whether the opponent was an undying saint or ultimate god, One would be oppressed under this pressure if one's life rating was weaker than Jian Wushuang's. Crimson Stone Saint would not be able to resist such pressure, even if he met Jian Wushuang at his peak when he was still alive. So this is the perfect chaotic creature's body which Master mentioned. Jian Wushuang was curious about his own changes and was exploring every possibility which came with it. Before his breakthrough, Jian Wushuang was talented and powerful in many aspects, but there was still a gap from achieving the body of a true perfect chaotic creature. Jian Wushuang prioritized checking out his divine body. His divine body was many times stronger than before. His bones, muscles, vessels, and down to even his body's minute cells were extremely tough. As he sat there, he could sense every single cell in his body was perfectly in place and coordinated without any flaws. If he encountered Yu Aoqing's death blow which pierced through his skin barrier defenses again, his skin would be unscathed. Next up was to examine his divine power. Jian Wushuang could clearly sense his divine power had increased by leaps and bounds. Not only had his divine power become purer and mightier, but his divine powers could be manifested to a wider extent. His divine powers were already incomparably abundant when he was just at the chaotic realm and was sufficient to support him in a battle for a prolonged period. Both the Seven Stars' secret techniques and the divine god of punishment required massive divine powers as a basis to be executed. If any ordinary peak chaotic realm were to simultaneously perform these two secret techniques, their divine powers could at most support a few breaths before exhaustion. However, the same could not be said for Jian Wushuang, as he could last for quite a long time while demonstrating both techniques together. He now seemed to have attained limitless divine powers which were truly bottomless like the vast oceans. Such surging divine powers was sufficient for him to participate in any fights or fierce battles without being exhausted, as the divine powers consumed was nothing compared to his recovery speed. Thereafter, Jian Wushuang examined his soul. In his sea of knowledge, his corporal soul had developed under the protection of the exquisite pagoda as compared to when he was at the chaotic realm. The changes were not significant, but Jian Wushuang was aware that his soul development was by far the greatest transformation he went through. The soul was the foundation of a cultivator's life after all. Jian Wushuang's life rating transformation mainly occurred to his soul. Although Jian Wushuang was at the ordinary level of a divine demon, the immensity of his soul powers and the tenacity of his soul was unmatched by any other divine demons. He even thought that his soul strength was comparable to an ultimate god's. Divine body, divine powers, soul. He had reached perfection in all aspects. Right at that instance, Jian Wushuang's expression changed and a loud bang sounded. One of his arms was blasted off, but it miraculously and completely healed the very next second. Jian Wushuang grinned. After that, a rumbling sound. His divine body began to fall apart. Soon after that, his limbs fused in the blink of an eye and became intact once again. So, I have an immortal body once again. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. In his previous life, he had an ability equivalent to an undying saint's immortal body. After becoming a perfect chaotic creature, he had regained that ability again, and it seemed to be more powerful than before. Previously, he repeatedly relied on his divine powers to repair his divine body. As long as his divine powers were sufficient, he could easily recover and self-resurrect again. Jian Wushuang discovered his new immortal body could rely on his divine powers to recover quickly, such that even his soul powers could be restored instantly. A typical immortal body of an ordinary undying saint does not have the ability to restore its soul. Once the cultivator's soul was wiped out, the immortal body was useless as it had no ability to restore itself. However, Jian Wushuang was different. His soul powers had perfectly coordinated with his divine powers. If someone launched a powerful soul attack on him and completely wiped out his powers, he would still be able to restore his soul powers using his own divine powers. In addition, Jian Wushuang's divine powers in his current life were much more powerful and purer than his previous. In his previous life, the Realm Lord personally annihilated every breath of his divine powers, which directly killed him. Fortunately, his master turned back time and resurrected him. The pure divine powers he possessed as a perfect chaotic creature cannot be annihilated by anyone, and as his strength continued to increase, his divine powers would become much more immense and powerful. In other words, it was now even more difficult to completely destroy his divine powers, making it an impossibility to kill him. He was truly invincible. Am I invincible? Jian Wushuang murmured before slowly shaking his head. My immortal body is indeed powerful. Perhaps ordinary cultivators like divine demons and undying saints will not be able to kill me, but it might not be the case for someone from a higher realm. Even in the future, when my powers are stronger and my divine powers much purer and immense, this immortal body may still not be able to protect me from absolute death. Jian Wushuang was very clear that nothing was absolute in heaven and earth. His immortal body may be invincible, but he was only the second perfect chaotic creature in heaven and earth. The first perfect chaotic creature was his master, who once had similar abilities as him, possessing the same immortal body. Most importantly, his master had reached the peak of heaven and earth, conquering the realm lord. Even so, his master had died. If his master could be destroyed, then he was also unable to entirely avoid this fate. The only advantage was that only a few people possessed such capabilities. My divine body, divine power, soul power, recovery ability, immortal body, and even comprehension ability have reached their most perfect states. Besides, I have full control over my life rating pressure now. Perfect chaotic creature. The peerless perfect chaotic creature in heaven and earth. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands tightly with eyes gleaming with intense excitement. Only when he truly became a perfect chaotic creature had he realized what a freak he was. Jian Wushuang. A low roar sounded abruptly from the void ahead, which actually came from Crimson Stone Saint, who was still in a kneeling position. Rage and humiliation could be seen swirling in his eyes while his stare locked onto Jian Wushuang. Oh, I've almost forgotten about him. Jian Wushuang uncontrollably smiled and lifted the life rating pressure off Crimson Stone Saint with the powers of his mind. Crimson Stone Saint then exhaled heavily and slowly pulled himself up. The life rating pressure directly suppresses a cultivator without differentiating their realm or strength. Even an undying saint was unable to resist and was forced to surrender. This can be my ace in the hole, muttered Jian Wushuang. The life rating pressure was indeed a killer move. Jian Wushuang would keep it hidden and only reveal it under critical moments. After all, it would be too ostentatious if he easily displayed this power, as it would raise suspicions and expose those secrets that he would like to keep about himself. Especially when people noticed a mere divine demon like him could exert such intensive pressures which even an undying saint could not parry off. Jian Wushuang. Who the hell are you? Where are you from? Crimson Stone Saint screamed in frustration. He began to address Jian Wushuang differently. Previously, he called Jian Wushuang young man as a friendly gesture towards a junior. After he saw Jian Wushuang in a different light, he naturally changed the way he addressed Jian Wushuang. It doesn't matter who I am or where I am from. What's important is that I've told you before, you aren't qualified to take me as your personal disciple even at your peak. You should understand why I dare say that now. Jian Wushuang stood up tall with his extremely calm expression. Crimson Stone Saint fell silent. He wanted to take Jian Wushuang as his personal disciple before, but had abandoned such ideas now. Jian Wushuang had instilled fear and awe in him. How could an ordinary undying saint like him take Jian Wushuang as his disciple? Crimson Stone Saint. Jian Wushuang looked at him in the eye. You've set me up to fight against those various sects' genius disciples and landed me in hot soup after provoking so many sections. I should have hated you very much. You also ought to know that if I wanted to, I could easily destroy your tomb as well as your consciousness. His words sent shivers up Crimson Stone Saint's spine. He admitted there was some truth in Jian Wushuang's words. He had lost control of his limbs under the life rating pressure exerted by Jian Wushuang. If Jian Wushuang had intended to kill him at that time, there was nothing he could do to save himself. Having said that, I've also benefited a lot from the opportunities in Saint's Tomb. I made a breakthrough in my Sword Principles understanding of the 8th Trial Bridge. I was given the Purple Blood Saint's inheritance. The enlightenment through Fengtian Scroll and spending time in Divine Power Ocean had also tremendously helped me. Therefore, I'll call it even and will no longer blame you for what had happened. Jian Wushuang paused momentarily before continuing. Let's talk about your personal affairs now. As an undying saint, you came forward and forced me to become your personal disciple. You must have some special intentions. Otherwise, you would not have disregarded your identity or pride. Go on. Tell me what's going on. Jian Wushuang smiled indifferently while maintaining eye contact with Crimson Stone Saint as though he could read Crimson Stone Saint like a book. Jian Wushuang, Crimson Stone Saint, was startled. Not only is he very talented with a strong background, but he's also a man of sound judgment. Hence, he found out I've intentions behind my moves. Crimson Stone Saint was amazed and finally came clean after taking a deep breath. Jian Wushuang, you guessed it. I do have a motive behind wanting you as my disciple. In fact, my intentions are very simple. I see that you are extremely talented and have great potential in making a breakthrough and become an ultimate god or even realm lord in the future. So I wanted you to do something for me in the future. What thing? Jian Wushuang asked. Go and help someone called Xianxia. She's my daughter, said Crimson Stone Saint. Your daughter? Jian Wushuang was surprised. Jian Wushuang did not expect Crimson Stone Saint, who had been dead for more than 100,000 years, to have a daughter that was still alive. Back then, I was one of the experts among the peak experts of the 9 realms of Golden Crow. I was one of the 9 realm masters of the Golden Crow, controlling 381 stellar regions and created the Crimson Stone Fort. There were around 10,000 ultimate gods, millions of divine demons, and countless experts under me, but I was unfortunately killed in a conspiracy. My daughter, Xianxia, was also very talented and reached peak ultimate god realm before my death. I've also made her my successor as the fort master before my death to rule the realm. However, apart from a few loyal followers, most of the ultimate gods and divine demons began acting recklessly without my command, and the Crimson Stone Fort soon became a huge mess. We are relying solely on Xianxia alone to handle both internal and external conflicts. Not long ago, Xianxia visited me in this tomb, and I've learned of her tough situation, so I want to get someone capable and reliable to assist her. Crimson Stone Saint looked disheartened at this point in time. I was initially looking for a suitable successor so that I can hand over my complete inheritance to that successor. With that, I hope my successor can go forward and help my daughter. To my disappointment, I found none over the years until the day I saw you. You are extremely talented with huge future potentials. If you can sincerely help Xianxia, it's likely for her to tide over those difficulties. Unfortunately, you are good with the sword and are unable to inherit my mantle. Moreover, you may not be willing to be my disciple, so I had no choice but to set you up. After Crimson Stone Saint finished talking, he was silent again. He did deliberately plot against Jian Wushuang before and intentionally forcing Jian Wushuang to become his disciple. He was very confident in thinking that anyone would submit to fate and agreed to be his disciple for the sake of personal safety or benefits. He had definitely underestimated Jian Wushuang's capabilities, as Jian Wushuang was a terrifying huge freak. Is that all? Jian Wushuang stared at the Crimson Stone Saint calmly. What Crimson Stone Saint did was justifiable and all the dots were connected, so he sounded credible. Although Jian Wushuang had never heard of the Crimson Stone Fort, he did read about the 9 realms of Golden Crow before. Crimson Stone Saint, let's make a deal, said Jian Wushuang suddenly. Deal? What deal? Crimson Stone Saint looked over. I won't be your personal disciple, but I can promise you when I'm sufficiently strong and powerful, I'll go to Crimson Stone Fort and help your daughter, Xianxia. On one condition, you have to give me the Feng Tian scroll. Feng Tian scroll? Crimson Stone Saint's complexion changed slightly. That was the greatest opportunity and the most precious treasure in Saint's tomb. He planned to pass it on to his personal disciple who will claim his mantle. However, Jian Wushuang, you just said you will help Xianxia? How will you offer your help? Crimson Stone Saint asked in a deep voice. I'll help as much as possible, of course. If I'm powerful enough, I can help to resolve all the troubles your daughter has encountered, said Jian Wushuang with a smile. Are you serious? How can I trust that you will do as you've said? Crimson Stone Saint asked. Old man, not everyone is as impervious as you to lose face. I'll keep my word, but neither will I take an oath or make an agreement with you. I've made an offer and requested something in return. It's up to you to take it up or not. Jian Wushuang waved his hand insouciantly. Crimson Stone Saint fell silent once again. Crimson Stone Saint finally broke his silence and said, "Okay, let's do it." Crimson Stone Saint flipped his hand as soon as he said that. The void surrounding them distorted into weird shapes as it made an opening to allow an ancient and mysterious picture scroll to emerge from within. Crimson Stone Saint directly sent it into Jian Wushuang's hands. Jian Wushuang raised his hand and took it with a smile cracked on his face, feeling very pleased. Smart move. That saved me from spending the time and effort. Crimson Stone Saint's face twitched slightly upon hearing that. Only then did he remember Jian Wushuang had the capabilities to destroy him. Had he refused to accept the condition, Jian Wushuang could have easily killed him, bagged the Fengtian scroll, and taken full control over Saint's tomb. Jian Wushuang would have owned everything within the tomb in that case, including those the saint intended to leave for his personal disciple. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang did not intend to do so. Jian Wushuang, Fengtian scroll's origin is extraordinary. I only managed to get one of the scrolls, said Crimson Stone Saint. Only one of the scrolls? You meant there are many more Fengtian scrolls? Jian Wushuang asked in surprise. The Crimson Stone Saint nodded. Yes, I don't know how many scrolls there are in total, but each scroll is extremely precious. Although the scroll is of little use to an undying saint, it's extremely beneficial to anyone below the undying saint cultivation level. There are rumors stating that if one can obtain more than 3 Fengtian scrolls at a time, then it would be valuable to an undying saint. Unfortunately, I've only managed to get my hands on one of them, and even that alone required exceptional good luck. Understood. Anticipation rose in Jian Wushuang's heart. He spent 10 days meditating upon Fengtian scroll, which proved to be extremely helpful for him. He was certain that Fengtian scroll was of great help to him, and that was just a single scroll. He could not help but wonder what if he could get more scrolls. Jian Wushuang knew fully well that it was not going to be easy getting hold of other Fengtian scrolls. Jian Wushuang, I have one more thing here which I wonder if you are interested, announced Crimson Stone Saint suddenly. What is it? Jian Wushuang immediately looked over. Crimson Stone Saint smiled slightly, and when he flipped his hand, there was a blood-colored token in his palm. This blood-colored token looked very ordinary but gave off an extremely unique aura. A hint of powers suspended on its surface at the same time. That power was neither divine power nor some sort of pressure but an esoteric power. This? Jian Wushuang frowned as he studied the extraordinary token. He knew at first glance it was something special. This is the heaven-slashing token which I got on a fortuitous occasion, explained Crimson Stone Saint. Heaven-slashing token originated from the ancient god realm. It came from the most ancient and mysterious force, the Heaven-slashing Alliance. The Heaven-slashing Alliance is very unique and might have been the most unique and distinctive alliance in ancient god realm. Surprisingly, the Heaven-slashing Alliance does not have any entry restrictions on its members, and does not care about one's background or identity. Anyone who wishes to be a member can join the alliance even if they already belong to another sect and are holding high-level positions like leaders or senior experts in their sections. Of course, there are extremely high prerequisites to join the alliance. In terms of strength, one must at least be an ultimate god, preferably a peak ultimate god. Besides meeting the requirement of strength and power, one must own a heaven-slashing token and pass the test prior to becoming a member. I heard that the members get a lot of benefits. What are the benefits? Jian Wushuang asked. Crimson Stone Saint shook his head. I have no idea what they are, as I've only heard rumors about them. I heard that the Heaven-slashing Alliance is extremely influential despite being rather lenient to their members who rarely keep in contact or form close relationships. As long as one can afford to pay the price, the Alliance is able to dispatch 3 undying saints or above experts to any remote territory in ancient god realm within a very short period of time. Dispatch 3 undying saints or above experts to any remote territory in a short time. Are they really that powerful? Jian Wushuang was surprised. The Crimson Stone Saint answered solemnly. Of course. Jian Wushuang, you ought to know that Heaven-Slashing Alliance exists completely in the dark. No one knows the true identity of any Heaven-Slashing Alliance's members. They are extremely careful and will completely erase all traces of their acts, so that no one can find out their identities, which prevents them from being assassinated. There are many experts with extraordinary backgrounds and statuses in the ancient god realm after all. Their hands are tied due to their respectable identity, as they had scruples doing certain matters. Therefore, being a member of Heaven-Slashing Alliance allowed them to fight, loot, or even kill for their own benefit. The best part is that it will not have any impact on their existing statuses. This had led to many powerful Ultimate God or Undying Saints experts eager to join Heaven-Slashing Alliance. Although the Heaven-Slashing Alliance has always been hidden and has never gotten involved in any fights for hegemony, it still has an unmatched influence in ancient god realm. They're indeed formidable, said Crimson Stone Saint. Jian Wushuang clicked his tongue when he slowly took in the information. The alliance was indeed appealing to many experts, as it allowed them to unscrupulously kill and loot without exposing their true identities. That alone would have been able to attract many experts. Crimson Stone Saint, since you have the Heaven-Slashing token and are powerful, why didn't you join the Heaven-Slashing Alliance? Jian Wushuang asked. I've always wanted to join, but unfortunately wasn't capable enough to do so. The Crimson Stone Saint explained. The Heaven-Slashing Alliance only takes an elite and experts from every cultivation realm. I've gotten hold of this Heaven-Slashing token when I was just an ultimate god. However, I had no confidence in passing the Heaven-Slashing Alliance's test. After I became an Undying Saint, I was even less certain about passing their test for Undying Saints. Due to that reason, I never went for the tests in the end. I wonder if you go for it. You are simply incredible in manifesting powers exceeding your cultivation level. After you became a peak ultimate god, I'm sure the Heaven-Slashing Alliance's test is just peanuts for you. Jian Wushuang pondered for a moment before slightly nodded. Then let me have this. What do you want in return? It's very simple. In the future, I hope you'll find a way to help Sewer break through to the Undying Saint realm when you arrive at Crimson Stone Fort, apart from helping her to resolve her problems. Crimson Stone Saint said solemnly. Break through to the Undying Saint realm? Crimson Stone Saint, aren't you thinking too highly of me? Jian Wushuang frowned. There was a huge gap between ultimate gods and Undying Saints. A breakthrough to the Undying Saint was like one giant leap. Jian Wushuang was indeed talented and would be able to achieve the Undying Saint realm in the future, but he doubted his abilities to help others do the same. Besides, even if Jian Wushuang was able to do it, a mere Heaven-Slashing token would not be sufficient for his efforts. The Crimson Stone Saint smiled. Don't worry, my daughter is not weak. She was only one step away from achieving the Undying Saint realm before I passed away and had a high chance of making a breakthrough. However, she had to shoulder the responsibility to handle Crimson Stone Fort all by herself with my passing. She was under too much pressure and never worked on her breakthrough thereafter. As long as you can resolve the crisis for her and allow her to relax, she should have no problem in making a breakthrough. Furthermore, I'm not asking too much. I just hope you'll try your best to help her break through. Only when she reaches the level of an Undying Saint can I be relieved. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. Understood. Okay. I'll promise you. Crimson Stone Saint smiled and tossed the blood-colored token over to Jian Wushuang. After Jian Wushuang received it, he placed the blood-colored token in his hand and calmly examined it. Heaven-Slashing token? Heaven-Slashing Alliance. Jian Wushuang murmured. There was a sudden thought erupting in him. Heaven-Slashing Alliance was mysterious and powerful. His master Xianxia, the first perfect chaotic creature in the world, was also the inventor of the strongest secret sword technique, Heaven-Slashing technique. Could there be any connections between them? Perhaps it's just a coincidence. Jian Wushuang shook his head and no longer further probed into the matter. Crimson Stone Saint, the agreement has been made between you and me. I want to stay in this divine power ocean for a while to absorb more divine powers, since I still have a lot of purple amulets at hand. There shouldn't be any problems, right? Jian Wushuang asked. He noticed Crimson Stone Saint had expelled all the other genius disciples from Divine Power Ocean and other corners of Saint's tomb. He was the only one left. Sure, it's just some divine powers. You can absorb as much as possible, but you can't stay for too long. After all, Saint's tomb is only open for at most a year each time. Some time has passed, so you are left with only a few months, said Crimson Stone Saint. A few months? No, I won't take that long. Jian Wushuang smiled before sitting down cross-legged again in the Divine Power Ocean. The Crimson Stone Saint remained standing on the surface of the Divine Power Ocean and watched calmly. He did not mind Jian Wushuang absorbing more divine powers. Although Jian Wushuang was absorbing divine powers much faster than any average cultivator by dozens or even hundreds of times, he was not bothered at all. The Divine Power Ocean which I've created is vast and has magnificent divine powers. How much divine power could Jian Wushuang absorb in a few months' time? That was what Crimson Stone Saint thought. However, at the very next moment, rumbling, the Divine Power Ocean became choppy. A terrifying suction power swept out from Jian Wushuang. The power was much stronger than which Jian Wushuang manifested when he was still at peak chaotic realm. It was at least hundreds or even thousands of times stronger. Earlier, Jian Wushuang stirred up a rapid movement around him when he was absorbing the divine powers in the ocean with all his might. Imagine that suction power had increased by thousands of times. That scene was astonishing. The Divine Power Ocean had pretty much gone crazy. Limitless ancient God realm divine powers came from all corners of the Divine Power Ocean towards Jian Wushuang. It was instantly absorbed and refined by Jian Wushuang. It was mind-blowing to see the huge and endless Divine Power Ocean's sea level began dropping at a visible speed. It seemed like the entire ocean was channeling its power into Jian Wushuang. How is this possible? Crimson Stone Saint's eyes widened and he was completely stunned. If he was not bothered earlier previously, he was about to go crazy now with the event occurring before his eyes. There was nothing he could do about it while Jian Wushuang absorbed divine powers at an incredible speed. Not only was he absorbing the power fast, but was also much faster in refining that power. The huge gush of divine power that continuously went into his body was refined and almost immediately transformed into his own divine powers. This was implausible. My divine power ocean. Crimson Stone Saint had his eyes locked on the declining sea level around him in astonishment, but he could not do anything about it. He did not have the courage to stop Jian Wushuang, so he could only watch the divine power in the Divine Power Ocean disappear. 3 days passed in a flash. As the last wisp of ancient God realm divine power was absorbed by Jian Wushuang, the vast and endless Divine Power Ocean completely dried up. The Divine Power Ocean was gone. There was no ancient God realm divine power left. Crimson Stone Saint was still standing there, but his complexion was extremely ugly. He was heartbroken. In order to create the Divine Power Ocean, he poured in almost all his wealth and also used quite a few tactics. Even though Saint's tomb was opened many times in the past, the divine power remained abundant despite a large number of genius disciples entering the Divine Power Ocean every time to absorb divine powers. However, the Divine Power Ocean had completely dried up solely because of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes once again and let out a long sigh. Unexpectedly, my divine power absorption and refinement speed have become the scariest skill I have after becoming a real perfect chaotic creature. I only used 3 days to absorb such a vast divine power ocean. Jian Wushuang himself was quite surprised. He knew his speed of absorbing the ancient God realm divine power would greatly increase after his breakthrough, but he had not expected it to be so fast. He made another breakthrough as he refined all the ancient God realm divine power from the Divine Power Ocean and reached the level of a second-class divine demon. In fact, the divine powers he had refined were more than enough for any ordinary cultivator to make a breakthrough all the way into the level of an ultimate god or even an undying saint. However, he was only capable of advancing from third-class divine demon to second-class divine demon. That showed just how much divine power his body was able to contain. I can absorb and refine divine power at such fast speeds. Does this mean as long as there are sufficient divine powers available, I can use them to improve my cultivation level. Jian Wushuang muttered. A breakthrough in cultivation level required the sufficient accumulation of divine powers and also a strong understanding of laws. But for Jian Wushuang, his understanding regarding all aspects of the laws had met all the requirements. As long as he had sufficient divine powers, he could progress his cultivation level without worrying about foundation stability since he had a perfect foundation. Everything was perfectly coordinated with his own divine body. No matter how much divine power he absorbed and refined, it would not affect his foundation at all. Then again, the divine power he needed for a breakthrough was too much. Advancing from third-class divine demon to second-class divine demon required him to absorb the entire divine power ocean. Hence he definitely needed much more divine powers to progress from second-class divine demon to first-class divine demon. It was not easy getting hold of so much divine power. Well, no hurry. I'll go slow and steady. Jian Wushuang smiled before raising his head to look at Crimson Stone Saint who was in front of him. Crimson Stone Saint, my apologies. I've accidentally absorbed your entire divine power ocean. The corners of Crimson Stone Saint's mouth twitched slightly, but he managed to reply through gritted teeth. Well, it's just some ancient god realm divine power. That's nothing to me. Although I only exist in the form of consciousness, I can rebuild a divine power ocean as long as I'm given enough time. Oh! Jian Wushuang raised his brows and was not surprised. I've absorbed the entire divine power ocean and gained a lot of benefits here. The saint's tomb no longer appeals to me. Crimson Stone Saint, send me out of here, said Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, the various sex experts seem to be waiting for you outside the tomb. If you go out now, those sects will not let you go. Do you need me to help you dismiss them? Said Crimson Stone Saint. He only existed in the form of consciousness and no longer possessed any power. Nonetheless, he had some tricks up his sleeves left in the tomb, and those tricks could affect the glade outside of Saint's tomb. He was not bluffing when he offered to dismiss those various sex experts out there on the glade. However, Jian Wushuang smiled politely and shook his head. There's no need for you to get involved. They are just a group of clowns. I can solve them by myself. Besides, I've just made a breakthrough and my powers have improved greatly, but I'm uncertain where my current combat power stands. Those various sex experts outside can allow me to test my capabilities. The Crimson Stone Saint raised his brows. If those experts heard you, they might vomit blood in anger. Jian Wushuang smiled sinisterly. Hehe, let's just send me out. Crimson Stone Saint did not hesitate and immediately waved his big hand. A spatial passage leading to the outside appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, remember what you have promised me. Otherwise, Crimson Stone Saint wanted to threaten Jian Wushuang but soon learned that he had no bargaining power. Don't worry, I'll do as I promised. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly before stepping into the spatial passage and quickly disappeared. The spatial passage closed up after Jian Wushuang disappeared. The Crimson Stone Saint was the only one left standing in the tomb. Looking at the place where Jian Wushuang disappeared, Crimson Stone Saint felt incredibly complicated. After a long time, he sighed. Sewer, this is the only thing Father can do for you. I hope Jian Wushuang can fulfill his promise. All the best to both of you. Crimson Stone Saint soon returned to the independent space where he was and began his long slumber. On the glade, outside Saint's tomb, the various sex experts, including those genius disciples who were sent out by Crimson Stone Saint in advance, were still gathered there. Those experts should have returned to their respective sects with their own genius disciples since their disciples have emerged from Saint's tomb. However, no one left. Many sex experts kept waiting. Those sex experts wore extremely cold expressions with their eyes, giving away terrifying killing intent. They were waiting for someone. That person was Jian Wushuang. Everyone was waiting for Jian Wushuang to come out of Saint's tomb. Second Elder. Is there really no room for discussion with the Lord? Zhongyi, Sutong, and several other Narcissus Island disciples gathered around Elder Lingyi. The decision was made by the Lord after discussing with the other elders, and it had been announced to the various sections. Therefore, Jian Wushuang is no longer a disciple of Narcissus Island. After he comes out of the tomb, he no longer has anything to do with us no matter what he encounters. Elder Lingyi looked indifferent. Zhongyi, don't put Elder Lingyi in a difficult situation. The decision has been made and there is no more room for change. Moreover, you saw that even the will of Heaven Wei cannot tolerate Jian Wushuang's existence. How can Narcissus Island accommodate him? Seventh Elder chipped in. Zhongyi and Su Tong both quieted down. They were trying their very best to fight for Jian Wushuang so that Narcissus Island would defend him. However, things had been decided and they could change nothing on their own. On the other hand, Shuabing was also begging those experts from Ancient Star Temple. But their leader, a peak divine demon elder, frankly told her, Shuabing, we realize Jian Wushuang is your brother, but the troubles he got himself into is too serious that even a top 10 sect in Wuxia wilderness such as Narcissus Island took the initiative to abandon him. What can we do? Shuabing ran out of ideas. Right at that moment, ring. An eye-piercing light lit up as a spatial passage formed between heaven and earth. Immediately, all the expert disciples on site looked over at the spatial passage. Coming out, waves of terrifying killing intentions rose up. When the light faded away, a figure gradually appeared. He was wearing a simple black robe and carrying a long sword on his back. His face was cold as he walked out of the spatial passage slowly. The various sects experts started moving around in the glade and soon had the black-robed young man who just got out of the spatial passage surrounded in the middle. Countless hateful, cold, and bloodthirsty eyes locked on Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, you devil, Heaven's Way will not tolerate you. He actually had the guts to come out from Saint's tomb. Shouts filled the air of the glade. A while ago, when Jian Wushuang was making a breakthrough, the immense pressure from his life rating was sweeping everywhere and caused the arrival of the will of Heavenly Way. Although, for whatever reason, the will of Heavenly Way faded, but that scene had still been witnessed by those surrounding experts. All of them knew the reason the will of Heaven's Way appeared was because of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, who just stepped out of the spatial passage and saw them. However, he was not the least bit surprised. As expected, all of you are waiting for me? Jian Wushuang murmured, showing not the slightest bit of panic or fear on his face, but a little smile instead. Even if he let an army of 10,000 stands before him, he would still be calm and composed. You are Jian Wushuang. A frosty voice suddenly filled the air. The voice sounded cold and proud, making all the experts look over at its origins. They saw a buff man with a crimson-colored battle blade on his back walking step by step towards Jian Wushuang with his arms crossed. His pace was very slow, but every step contained terrifying power. Every step he took would cause a small treble on the ground. There were strong energies rising from his every step. That energy became more prominent and violent as time went on. The energy of infinite brutality and fear suddenly swept toward Jian Wushuang like a tsunami. He's Tu Qianqing, the first-ranked genius of Wuxia wilderness, has finally taken matters in his own hands. Does Tu Qianqing really want to personally take action and kill Jian Wushuang? Hey Tu Qianqing, this is a true monster you're dealing with. Each of the various sects experts had identified the buff man. Tu Qianqing enjoyed a huge reputation in Wuxia wilderness. He was widely recognized in Wuxia wilderness as the undisputed first-ranked genius who was ranked first of the 12 minor kings. However, following the incredible display of Jian Wushuang's fearful abilities and talents in Saint's tomb, his reputation as the first-ranked genius was challenged. He stopped walking as the energy pressing against Jian Wushuang had reached its peak. Tu Qianqing finally arrived very close to Jian Wushuang. Qianqing, Han Yun of the Great Compassionate Sect who was standing behind looked over with a frown. Please don't worry, Elder Han Yun. Just leave him to me. Tu Qianqing smiled plainly with resounding confidence in his tone. Han Yun's eyesight froze for a second but did not stop him. Senior brother Qianqing. Kill him and avenge junior brother Pang Tao. Long Zishan shouted. Both Han Yun and Long Zishan had absolute confidence in Tu Qianqing. Their confidence was based on those terrifying victory accumulations that Tu Qianqing had obtained. Many years ago, Tu Qianqing killed a peak divine demon with thunderous tactics and solidified his reputation as the first-rank genius while he was merely a first-class divine demon. A long time had passed since then, and Tu Qianqing's abilities had only become more powerful, and he finally made a breakthrough to the peak divine demon realm. Not many people knew how strong his abilities were exactly. However, without a doubt, there were no more than a few peak divine demons and even half-step ultimate gods who could surpass him. His abilities were also the absolute strongest among those sex experts present. In the opinion of those many various sex experts, the fact that Tu Qianqing was going to take matters into his own hands meant Jian Wushuang was already a dead man. Even though Jian Wushuang had shown his abilities in Saint's Tomb being very powerful and defeated a large number of first-class divine demons by himself, it did not mean that his abilities were enough to withstand Tu Qianqing. Jian Wushuang, I'll give you two choices. Tu Qianqing crossed his arms and stared at Jian Wushuang coldly. One, you can kill yourself. That way you could at least die prettier. As for the second choice, it would be me who does the killing. You would end up dead anyway, and that would be a terrible end. Take your pick. You're giving me two choices and you ask me to kill myself? What confidence! Jian Wushuang laughed out loud. However, he could understand Tu Qianqing had his prior victories as proofs which allowed him such credibilities to speak in that manner. Moreover, Jian Wushuang's perfect chaotic creature breakthrough was true to every sense of the perfect term. He had reached perfection in every aspect and was equally perfect in controlling his divine powers to the extent of not leaking even a single trace of his energy. Just purely based on his own control over divine power energies, he could mask his true realm without relying on any secret technique to the extent that none of those divine demons could see through him. No one else could tell either that he had broken through to divine demon realm and a second-class divine demon to boot. If they knew, perhaps Tu Qianqing would not feel as confident anymore. If you want me to kill myself, it would be impossible. Why don't you just attack, and I would love to see exactly how strong the undisputed first-rank genius of Wuxia Wilderness really is. Jian Wushuang smiled. Well then, I shall fulfill your wish. Tu Qianqing's voice was still cold, but his right hand was already reaching for the crimson-colored battle blade on his back. As he held on to the blade's handle, the battle blade slowly slid out of its sheath with a slight pull. Just as he was unsheathing, bam! Terrifying energy suddenly exploded and filled the entire place. It looked almost like the massive glade had turned into a boundless crimson sea in a split second. All those experts on the glade held their breath. All eyes were on Tu Qianqing. Under the huge surge of vicious energy, the battle blade was completely unsheathed from Tu Qianqing's back. Boom! A strong bolt of blade essence rose in an instant. Tu Qianqing's body moved. Whoosh! A flash of crimson light suddenly appeared in the void. That crimson light seemed like a scarlet mist flowing in the air, but in fact, it was a flash of crimson-colored blade light. The blade light destroyed everything in its way as it slashed open space, heaven, and earth. All of those many experts around showed expressions of surprise and fear when they saw that crimson-colored blade light. Is this the capabilities of Wuxia Wilderness's top genius? Too strong, he's way too strong. Nobody can withstand this strike of his. Blade principle at full completion. Tu Qianqing's understanding of the blade principle has reached the level of full completion. His techniques are even scarier. This strike alone is enough to easily destroy any peak divine demon. He's Tu Qianqing in the end. After years of inactivity, the moment he makes a move is shocking, to say the least. Even many peak divine demons from different sects exclaimed in awe when they saw the crimson-colored blade light. That stroke was truly terrifying. It also truly possessed the powers to kill peak divine demons. There were many peak divine demons from different sects, but only a handful of them who could probably withstand that attack. Senior Brother Qianqing. This is Senior Brother Qianqing's true ability. Jian Wushuang is doomed. He's done for sure. Long Zishan started to growl quietly. He was incredibly excited and looked at Tu Qianqing with full admiration. However, Jian Wushuang's facial expression remained the same, while he watched the crimson-colored blade light tearing through the air and sweeping towards him. He was not in a hurry to strike back. Instead, he was allowing the blade light to close in on him. He's still not taking action. Is this Jian Wushuang stupid or something? That can't be it. We've seen his battle strength in Saint's Tomb. Even if he wasn't good enough to withstand Tu Qianqing, he could at least endure for a while instead of being unable to strike back at all. What exactly is this kid planning to do? All the sex experts could not understand Jian Wushuang's actions as it was extremely strange. Did he give up? Tu Qianqing's eyes were like lightning as he pressed on with infinite viciousness against Jian Wushuang. However, Jian Wushuang began to strike right when Tu Qianqing thought his attacks would sweep him and break his body apart. His move was not fast nor furious as he merely extended his hand and casually grabbed at the front. Twang! A noise that sounded like colliding metal tore through the air. The terrifying crimson-colored blade light faded in the blink of an eye. A crimson-colored battle blade appeared in the void. The most incredible part was the hand that had tightly grabbed the tip of the blade's edge. An immense strength came from the hand which locked the crimson-colored battle blade in place just like a clam. What? Tu Qianqing was dumbfounded. Everyone else around did too. Long Zishan, who was shouting in frenzy with fanatical admiration towards Tu Qianqing just a second ago, was also dumbfounded. The entire world seemed to have become quiet for a short moment. Until the owner of the hand, Jian Wushuang, slowly raised his head and smiled at Tu Qianqing. Is this the ability which you're so proud of and relied on to make me kill myself? There was a trace of ridicule in Jian Wushuang's eyes. He stood right where he was with one hand folded at his back and the other hand holding Tu Qianqing's battle blade tightly. No matter how hard Tu Qianqing tried, he could not shake the blade off Jian Wushuang's grip. How is that possible? Tu Qianqing was completely puzzled. Just moments ago, he had sworn in front of everyone that he wanted to make Jian Wushuang kill himself. He ultimately made the strike himself and gave all he had to display his most mesmerizing strike. He had used that very same strike which killed off quite a few peak divine demons. However, Jian Wushuang simply stopped Tu Qianqing attack single-handedly, and the crux was he had grabbed onto that battle blade with only his bare hand. But how? Not only Tu Qianqing but everyone who witnessed it could not believe what they saw. However, Jian Wushuang only pursed his lips and said, I thought the first-rank genius in Wuxia wilderness was something special, but now that I've met him, he's just also. Jian Wushuang attacked as soon as he finished speaking. His right hand was still holding onto Tu Qianqing's battle blade, which Tu Qianqing could not shake off. His body dashed forward while the index finger of his other hand turned into a lightning bolt and shot outward. His finger attack was so swift that nobody could possibly react to it. Qianqing, fall back now. Han Yun from the Great Compassion sect shouted sternly as he quickly warned Tu Qianqing. Tu Qianqing also realized what was happening and let go of his battle blade before violently shooting his body backward, hoping to avoid the finger attack. Suddenly, however, sheesh! The finger attack speed suddenly sped up and shot through Tu Qianqing's skull in a flash. Tu Qianqing's eyes were wide open with his face still in disbelief, but his life had already ended. Whoosh! Tu Qianqing's lifeless body fell vertically towards the ground. Qianqing! Han Yun and the few peak divine demon elders of the Great Compassion sect looked extremely horrified. Senior brother Qianqing. Long Zishan and Yu Aoqing were also extremely terrified. As for the experts from other sects, their shocked feelings were clearly shown on their faces. Nobody would have ever expected that Tu Qianqing, the formerly first-rank genius of Wuxia wilderness, who had already broken through to peak divine demon realm, would die from a mere frontal attack by Jian Wushuang, despite taking action and displaying his strongest ability. Jian Wushuang's swift killer move had not given Tu Qianqing any chance to struggle or escape. Die, boy! An angry voice filled the void. The few peak divine demon elders from the Great Compassion sect were so furious that their faces turned plum red. Their eyes were bloodshot as they released surging waves of killing intent. Following Han Yun's enraged roar, the Great Compassion sect's 4 peak divine demon elders dashed towards Jian Wushuang at the same time. Just when they were attacking, let's go as well. That's right. Let's do it together and destroy this dreadful creature. Kill him. On the glade, experts from sects which lost many disciples to Jian Wushuang violently dashed forward. All of the experts attack Jian Wushuang in unison without any hesitation. Previously, they did not know Jian Wushuang had once again advanced his abilities. They thought that Tu Chenxing alone could suppress or even kill him, hence they did not attack together. However, Tu Chenxing was instantly killed, and only now did they realize Jian Wushuang's abilities were obviously beyond their imagination. They had to attack together in order to kill Jian Wushuang. The glade immediately fell into chaos as the fighting began. All those sex experts were mostly first-class divine demons, but there were also many peak divine demons totaling up to a terrifyingly huge number. At that moment, all of them charged forward with only one purpose: to kill Jian Wushuang. "Little brother!" Zhuobing screamed as loud as she could from among the crowd, wanting to head up, but Ling Dan and Ancient Star Temple experts stopped her with all their might. On the other hand, Elder Ling He and the seventh elder from Narcissus Island were both silent while Elder Wujin's body was trembling from feeling extremely helpless. Those few Narcissus Island disciples behind them looked at each other and quietly shook their heads. Nobody could help Jian Wushuang. He was on his own. However, Jian Wushuang wore a frosty smile when he looked at the experts from various sects charging at him from every direction. "Is this a siege? Boring." Jian Wushuang shook his head. In Saint's Tomb, he had spent most of his time surrounded and besieged by his attackers, causing him to have grown bored of this tactic. He had not expected that as soon as he exited Saint's Tomb, he was once again besieged by those experts on the glade. Is besieging really effective? Jian Wushuang mumbled to himself, but the Blood Mountain sword on his back was already in his hand. Jian Wushuang's figure started moving without any forewarning. Ring. In the void, a figure which looked exactly like Jian Wushuang appeared. That figure was not a space-time shadow, but a hologram instead. Formation of holograms was a requirement in order to achieve the first stage of space-time law after all. Leaving a hologram in the original spot he was standing, Jian Wushuang's figure quickly flashed off before returning once again with his real body overlapping with the hologram. However, his Blood Mountain sword has already been slowly returned to its sheath. Chaos still persisted between heaven and earth as those various sex experts were still pouncing toward Jian Wushuang with strong waves of killing intent. However, their figures could only charge halfway. "Stop! Stop quickly!" shouted a fearful voice, causing all those experts to stop and looked over the void before them. Seeing that caused all of them to open their eyes wide. The four great peak divine demons of the Great Compassion sect appeared in that void spot closest to Jian Wushuang at that very moment. They naturally reached Jian Wushuang first as they were the closest to him and also took the very first attack initiative. However, what really shocked everyone was the four great peak divine demons, including Han Yun, who was the strongest among them, had their heads severed from their bodies. Their heads severed from their bodies. Their four heads were flying across the void, yet to touch the ground. "Dead?" a peak divine demon said with a stutter. "I think I saw a sword light flashed by just now." "Yes, I saw it too, but it vanished too quickly. I thought I was hallucinating. But then, it's Jian Wushuang. It must be him. He has made a move." Voices of fear rose from everywhere. Those experts who were charging toward Jian Wushuang looked at him once again before looking at those corpses belonging to the Great Compassion sect's peak divine demons. They felt their skulls numbed as fear crept into their minds. The four great peak divine demons had attacked at the same time but were already killed before they could even see Jian Wushuang's attacks. It only took one strike to kill off the four great peak divine demons. Even Han Yun, who was the strongest among them, did not even have the chance to scream before they were eliminated. What kind of ability was that? An ultimate god. The battle strength of an ultimate god. That's right, it must be an ultimate god. I'm not mistaken. Only an ultimate god could kill the four great peak divine demons in one sword stroke. This Jian Wushuang actually has the battle strength of an ultimate god? Oh heavens! Did we just try to attack an expert who possesses the battle strength of an ultimate god? All those experts who came to besiege and attack Jian Wushuang went completely nuts. Other than that, there were many among them who had sensed the explosiveness of Jian Wushuang's divine powers. As a perfect chaotic creature, Jian Wushuang was capable of completely suppressing his divine powers. In normal circumstances, nobody could determine what his true abilities were. However, he definitely needed to use his divine powers once he started fighting and would no longer be able to hide it at that time. As such, they could now sense Jian Wushuang's divine powers had reached the stage of second-class divine demon. One must know that when Jian Wushuang was in peak chaotic realm, he could already defeat 50 first-class divine demons. Now that he had broken through 2 realms, shooting from peak chaotic realm directly to second-class divine demon, his ability would have surely surged immensely as well. This fact ascertained to them that Jian Wushuang had truly possessed an ultimate god's battle strength. Retreat. Retreat right now. Back off right away. An ultimate god's battle strength isn't something we can deal with. The various sects experts immediately backed off and gave up on attacking Jian Wushuang without hesitation. They had no choice, as the ultimate god and divine demon realms gap was just too big. Nobody could possibly cross over that gap. Even though there were many experts with tens of peak divine demons among them, they would never dare besiege and attack another expert with an ultimate god's battle strength even with double that amount, as it would be equivalent to seeking death. If an ultimate god unleashed his full abilities, killing peak divine demons would be as easy as killing chickens and dogs. Jian Wushuang sneered from seeing those experts retreating. They were just being so gung-ho about killing me. But now they are shamefully running away at full speed. Those experts' faces were boiling red upon hearing Jian Wushuang's insult, but could do nothing about it. Jian Wushuang smiled again. Never mind. I'm in a pretty good mood today. I'm too lazy to bring myself to your level. However, if you really want to kill me, I can give you a chance to do that, but you should at least get someone with real abilities. You lot are far from qualified. Jian Wushuang did not care about those experts' reactions around him after speaking. Instead, he sat on the ground in the lotus position and closed his eyes. It was obvious he was just going to sit there and wait for those sects to find some real experts. That was true as well. Jian Wushuang's advancement in Saint's Tomb was way too great, especially after he absorbed the entire divine power ocean and made a breakthrough to the second-class divine demon in one go. His advancement was so huge that he did not know which level he even was in at that point. He needed an opponent, a true expert to fight with. However, the first-class divine demons and peak divine demons that were present could not fulfill his requirements. He had to wait for the arrival of a higher-level expert. Jian Wushuang sat down waiting with his leg crossed, and the surroundings quieted down once again. Senior brother Qianxia, Elder Han Yun, and the other elders, they're all dead. Long Zishan stood on one side, still puzzled over what just happened. Senior brother Zishan, what should we do now? Yu Ouching next to him looked over. Long Zishan calmed himself down and looked at Jian Wushuang, who was sitting down cross-legged. He said with a grim face, "Wait, I've already informed the sect elders. Very soon our great compassion sect experts will rush over, maybe even be the supreme elder. Since Jian Wushuang is staying here to wait for his doom, let's fulfill his wish." Yu Ouching's eyes were stern. She nodded. However, deep inside, Yu Ouching had doubts. The experts from various sects around them could not kill Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang could clearly leave. However, he did not and chose to stay there instead, waiting for various sects to bring higher-level experts. That probably meant he wanted to fight an ultimate god expert. If the Great Compassion sect only sent the Supreme Elder over, he probably could not touch Jian Wushuang. Hidden in the centermost area of Wuxia wilderness, deep in the prehistoric jungle, was a gigantic sect gate. That sect gate was the gate of the Great Compassion sect. A person walked out slowly from the dark cave. He looked up and gazed at the sky. The sun shone down directly on him, and it was pleasantly warm. "It's been a long time since I looked at the sun outside," the person exclaimed. Then he disappeared in a flash. In a split second, that person had already appeared on the high platform of the Great Compassion sect. "It's the Supreme Elder. We pay our respect to the Supreme Elder." A few first-class divine demons on the high platform identified him right away and bowed down to him. "Open the spatial passage to Saint's Tomb," the man said in a frozen voice. "I..." The first-class divine demons answered. The spatial passage was opened soon after. The man did not wait another second before he stepped into the passage and disappeared. The divine demons on the high platform started discussing. Why is Supreme Elder going to Saint's tomb by himself? What exactly happened over there? Don't know, but it seems to be something big. A lot of sect's disciples were killed by a person at Saint's tomb. Even Great Compassion sect lost some disciples. Who has the gall to kill our people from the Great Compassion sect? Whoever he is. Now that Supreme Elder is taking matters into his own hands, this guy is doomed. The people from the Great Compassion sect all had near fanatical admiration and confidence toward their Supreme Elders. On the wide glade outside of Saint's tomb, Jian Wushuang did not wait too long. Ring! A spatial passage appeared in mid-air. Then, a figure slowly stepped out of it. The experts on the glade looked at the figure. Even Jian Wushuang opened his eyes to look at the newcomer. The person was extremely thin and his face was pale as paper, but at the same time looked extremely young and rather handsome. However, what came into sight was a head full of silver hair. His pupils were deep as if no light could shine through. He carried a green-colored long sword on his back. He only stood there quietly after he stepped out of the spatial passage. There was no energy projecting out of him and his face was as expressionless as an ancient well. However, it was the appearance of a man like this that made all the experts gasp. Fan Jianxian. It's Fan Jianxian, the indisputable #1 sword cultivator of Wuxia Wilderness. The Supreme Elder of the Great Compassion sect. An ultimate god has finally arrived in person. On top of that, it's the extremely terrifying Fan Jianxian. The experts trembled from the inside, admiring him with incredibly respectful eyes. Fan Jianxian was a legend in Wuxia Wilderness. He was one who started off weak and gradually worked his way up to become an expert. When he was only a disciple of the Great Compassion sect in his divine demon stage, he was already widely regarded as the #1 genius of the Wuxia Wilderness. When it came to natural gifts, he was absolutely on par with Tu Qianqing. He might even be stronger and shone brighter. His reputation resonates in every corner of Wuxia Wilderness. As he broke through different realms and finally reached the ultimate god realm, he disappeared from the scene. According to rumors, he went to other domains to explore and seek adventure for a while. Then, he soon returned to the Great Compassion sect and became their Supreme Elder, stationing in the sect all year long. Even though he had not done any fighting for years, his ability was not to be doubted. Supreme Elder. Long Zishan and Yu Aoqing came next to Fan Jianxian and bowed to him. Fan Jianxian only gave them a slight glance. Then in an instant, he locked his eyes on Jian Wushuang. Did my disciple die in his hands? Fan Jianxian spoke, his voice was extremely aloof. Yes, not only junior brother Pang Tao, but also senior brother Chen Cheng, Elder Han Yun, and the other elders. Long Zishan's face was bloodshot. He said urgently, Supreme Elder, you must avenge their deaths and break him into countless pieces. I know what to do. You can all stand back, said Fan Jianxian. Long Zishan shot Jian Wushuang with a cold glance, then stepped back with Yu Aoqing. The other experts around got the cue as well and stood far away. They were worried about becoming collateral damage in the upcoming battle. Under the scrutiny of all the experts, Fan Jianxian walked over, step by step, until he was not more than 100 meters from Jian Wushuang. So, you're Jian Wushuang? Fan Jianxian's voice remained cold. #1 sword cultivator of Wuxia Wilderness, Fan Jianxian? Jian Wushuang smiled slightly and stood up slowly. I've heard about you for a long time and I finally have the pleasure. Just recently in Anzhou Commandery, somebody recommended you to me. At that time, I gave you a chance to become my personal disciple even without knowing your actual gift in sword principles. What a pity that you declined it. Fan Jianxian stared at Jian Wushuang calmly. Only by hearing that, all the experts from various sects recalled that Jian Wushuang did reject Fan Jianxian. He declined the opportunity to become Fan Jianxian's personal disciple and went to Narcissus Island to become a regular outer disciple instead. To a lot of people, that was an incredibly foolish move. However, as Jian Wushuang gradually unveiled his true gift, They could finally understand why he made that choice. It was simply because he did not want to be tied up by the sect. If Jian Wushuang did accept the invitation from the Great Compassion sect, then Fan Jianxian and he would have been teacher and disciple instead. Fan Jianxian and Jian Wushuang finally met each other, while the people around began to wear a strange expression on their faces. "You should not have declined," said Fan Jianxian coldly. "Don't tell me, you really think you're qualified to be my teacher?" scoffed Jian Wushuang. In Saint's tomb, Crimson Stone Saint wanted to take him as his personal disciple so much that he even offered to give him extremely attractive benefits. But Jian Wushuang was not interested at all. Who did Fan Jianxian think he was? That's also true. However, since you're not my disciple, you'll have to die today. Fan Jianxian still sounded cold. Just as his voice faded, Fan Jianxian's pale hand had reached for the green sword behind his back. Shuang! As the long sword was unsheathed, a bolt of stunning sword essence shot through the void as though a gigantic dragon had woken up. Fan Jianxian single-handedly swung the green sword and swept sideways. Whoosh! A piercing green sword light furiously sliced towards Jian Wushuang. Air was being split open wherever it swung by and suffocated those surrounding experts with its terrifying power. Jian Wushuang remained at the same spot and watched as the green sword came at him. However, he had no intention of dodging, but to fend off with his own sword. It was not until when the green sword light arrived 3 meters before him that Jian Wushuang suddenly took action. His right hand formed a claw grip as a mixture of surging divine powers and sword essences gathering in his palm. In the blink of an eye, his hand had already held onto the incoming sword light and squeezed it really hard. The green sword light, which almost made all those surrounding experts suffocate, had exploded under Jian Wushuang's squeeze. Countless green sword lights were dispersed in every direction. An attack at this level is quite insufficient to kill me. Wu Jianshuang continued to stand there with a smile. However, those divine demons around were already stunned beyond words. They were already incredibly shocked when Jian Wushuang grabbed Tu Chenqing's sword light. However, the person who just issued that attack was a legitimate ultimate god expert. Even though the ultimate god had not unleashed his full power, that casually released sword light, which was already incredibly powerful, was neutralized by a bare-handed Jian Wushuang and squeezed till it exploded. That ability, as expected, you're already equipped with an ultimate god's battle strength. Moreover, your body is also extraordinarily strong. Fan Jianxian's face was cold and expressionless, even though Jian Wushuang had squeezed his sword light. After all, that sword strike was only casually issued just to test out Jian Wushuang's true abilities. The test results were clear. Regardless whether your battle strength is merely comparable to Ultimate God, even if you really are an Ultimate God expert, you are still going to die because you killed my personal disciple. Fan Jianxian's eyes shot out a cold light. With a huge noise, his sword essence shot up into the sky. Fan Jianxian's figure was moving mysteriously under the infinite sword essences. Similar to teleportation, Fan Jianxian's figure appeared in front of Jian Wushuang as he thrust out his green-colored long sword. The strike silently instantly stabbed through Jian Wushuang's body and exited from the other side. So fast! Those many experts around were shocked by watching the battle. Did Jian Wushuang die? No, that can't be. Those divine demons' faces changed. Fan Jianxian's pupil slightly shrunk as well because the Jian Wushuang that he stabbed had gradually disappeared. Space-time shadow? No, a space-time shadow wouldn't be able to escape my soul power's scrutiny. That was not a shadow, it's a space-time apparition. A piercing light flashed in Fan Jianxian's eyes. Space-time apparitions were something that could only be formed by possessing an extremely high understanding of the space-time law and reaching the first stage. What Jian Wushuang just formed was a space-time apparition, something completely different from the space-time shadow he had formed a while ago. This kid has reached such a high level of understanding towards space-time law? Fan Jianxian also felt incredibly shocked. The difficulty of understanding laws only got harder with each increasing stage. In normal circumstances, the first stage of law understanding was something very difficult to achieve, even for a regular ultimate god. For example, Fan Jianxian was still a far cry from reaching the first stage of law understanding. However, Jian Wushuang had obviously achieved the first stage of spacetime law since he could so easily form an apparition. He might even be quite skillful in that stage. Jian Wushuang was on a higher level than him when it came to the understanding of laws. Ring. A soft ring sliced through the air. The ring was very soft and might even be unnoticeable to first-class and peak divine demons. However, Fan Jianxian had super sharp senses. As the ringing started, he did a backhand with his sword, leaving a strange slash trace in the void before suddenly retracting the tip of his sword from the void. Previously, there was nothing in that part of the void, but when the sword tip retracted, a cold crimson-colored long sword appeared, and along with it was Jian Wushuang's figure. Clank! Jian Wushuang's figure vanished once again. Oh, competing in speed? Humph! Do you think I would be worried? Fan Jianxian's eyes projected a coldness as his figure shook and vanished. In the middle of the battlefield, both Jian Wushuang and Fan Jianxian exploded with great speeds. Two ghastly figures flashing repeatedly in the void. Every time the surrounding speculators saw their figures flashed, they had already appeared in another part of the void. They would appear 1,000 meters above in one moment and on the ground by the next while causing explosions with every clash. Those two figures mysteriously intertwined. Nobody could catch where the figures would appear next as they could only see violent flashes of sword lights sweeping willfully. On the glade, those sex experts and their disciples were stunned to the core. Goodness! This is what true speed looks like. We divine demons are very fast as well, but it's incomparable to this. Be grateful. Be grateful that we didn't continue attacking Jian Wushuang, or else he would have slaughtered all of us as easy as lifting a finger just by relying on his terrifying speed. Ultimate God. This is an ultimate God. Countless experts exclaimed in awe. Those disciples from various sects all showed fanatical and excited expressions. It was the first time for most of them to witness a battle on the ultimate God level. The most unbelievable part was that one of those ultimate gods was a disciple just like them, visiting Saint's tomb to look for opportunities. However, this person had gained the ability to challenge an ultimate god in the blink of an eye. Just from the situation alone, both of them were more or less equal in the fight. At least, Jian Wushuang and Fan Jianxian were on similar levels judging from their speed. Junior brother Wushuang could actually evenly fight with Fan Jianxian? That isn't just anyone. That's Fan Jianxian. Zhongyi Su Tong and the rest of Narcissus Island disciples could only widen their eyes in shock. Of the three Narcissus Island elders, Elder Wujian's face turned blue while Elder Lingyi and the seventh elder faces were filled with shock. In the battlefield's center, the two were frantically flashing with each of them wanting to suppress the other with their speed. Fan Jianxian, your moving technique is pretty good. Jian Wushuang slightly smiled. Humph. Don't dream of surpassing me just because you have a higher understanding in space-time law, scoffed Fan Jianxian. He might be below Jian Wushuang when it comes to the understanding of laws. However, he possessed a set of secret techniques on movement skills. With those secret techniques, he could unleash his ultimate speed, which was definitely comparable to Jian Wushuang's speed. As their speeds were about the same, they could only compete on sword principles. Ring. Jian Wushuang held his sword with one hand and swung it at will, chopping, stabbing, and sweeping, fully displaying his understanding of sword principles. As for Fan Jianxian, he was called Sword Immortal 1, and was also the #1 sword cultivator of the Wuxia wilderness. Hence his accomplishments were evidently extremely high. He was shrouded by heaven-shaking sword essences, appearing like the dictator of sword principles while displaying his swift and incomparably overpowering sword techniques. Attack. Non-stop attacks. Fan Jianxian's sword technique had a different yet similar style to Purple Blood Saint's, which leaned more on the one extremities. He attacked in a frenzy with his sword technique, maniacally oppressive and not leaving any breathing space for Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang was able to face those attacks quite calmly in the beginning. However, after a short while, he began to be on the losing side and making passive defenses. I'm not as skilled as he is with sword principles. A head-to-head battle puts me at a disadvantage, Jian Wushuang told himself. It was understandable, as Jian Wushuang may have lived a rather long life in his previous lifetime, but he did not spend much time on sword principles. Even though he was advancing at an incredible speed, his current life's time span was too short and he was also too young. It was only through various opportunities obtained in Saint's Tomb that allowed him to reach complete sword principle realm. However, Fan Jianxian had made a name for himself for a long time. His understanding of the sword had reached complete sword principle realm and was already at an extremely high level a long time ago. Fan Jianxian was also very skillful when it came to close-quarter combat. Hence, it was only normal for Jian Wushuang to be at a disadvantage purely from a sword technique standpoint. However, right at that moment, ring. Jian Wushuang's figure blurred and suddenly 3 Jian Wushuangs appeared. Apparitions. It was still a space-time apparition. The only difference was that Jian Wushuang could form a total of 2 apparitions. Together with his true self, it looked like there were 3 Jian Wushuangs. 2 great apparitions? Fan Jianxian's face immediately changed. Forming a space-time apparition was the first sign of one reaching the first stage of space-time law understanding. In Saint's Tomb, Jian Wushuang's understanding of space-time law was already infinitely close to the first stage of apparition forming before studying the Fengtian scroll. The Fengtian scroll was an immense help to him. By borrowing the secrets which Fengtian scroll had revealed to him, he gained huge advancement after 10 days despite studying sword techniques, space-time law, and transmigration at the same time. With regards to space-time law, he was not only able to step into the first stage and form his first apparition, but he was also able to form the second one as well. It showed that he had gained an extraordinary understanding regarding the first stage of space-time law. Every time he gained one more space-time apparitions, it greatly increased his speed. As such, when Jian Wushuang formed 2 apparitions at the same time, his speed had suddenly increased a great deal. Whoosh! 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 Jian Wushuang's figure flashes continuously, while his Blood Mountain sword had shifted from defense to offense and repeatedly attacked Fan Jianxian. Damn! His speed is a lot faster than before. Fan Jianxian's face turned gloomy. He had initially successfully suppressed Jian Wushuang with his sword technique, and that was also based on the fact that they were on a similar level of speed. However, Jian Wushuang was currently moving around Fan Jianxian and completely avoiding head-to-head combat since the great increase in his speed. He was looking for the right opportunities to attack at this moment. It mattered not how skillful Fan Jianxian was with his sword when he could not even touch Jian Wushuang at this point. Scram! Fan Jianxian growled quietly as a flourishing white light was suddenly released from his body. The extremely blinding white light had lit up heaven and earth. In fact, it was a frosty cold sword light that frenzy projected its attack in every direction. Jian Wushuang's figure was forced back by the sword light, and the 2 of them once again widened their distances from each other. Jian Wushuang, I truly have underestimated you. Fan Jianxian stared at Jian Wushuang with a heavy expression on his face. Even though he held back a little, a simple clashing of swords showed him that Jian Wushuang's true abilities were not to be taken lightly. You have a very high understanding of sword principles, but based on the understanding of laws, you're below me. Show me your strongest ability. Otherwise, your reputation as the #1 sword cultivator of Wuxia wilderness would have to be given to me. Jian Wushuang smiled. As you wish. Fan Jianxian did not waste any more words as a strong light grew in his eyes. Ring ring. Shapeless sword essences swept out from Fan Jianxian's body. However, what surprised everyone was that sweeping sword essence had then turned solid. The wall of sword essence swept into every direction like a gigantic domain, almost shrouded the entire battle in an instant. The dreamlike sword essence was like an ocean filling every corner. Fan Jianxian stood in the epicenter of the sword essence ocean like a dictator of sword principles. This is Sword World? Jian Wushuang felt the ocean of infinity sword essences around him, and his pupils suddenly shrunk. Sword World, the first stage of sword principles understanding. The realm of swords. This stage required forming a sword world within one's own body. Once the sword world was completed, it would be one with heaven and earth. During future battles, one could then bring out the sword world from inside their body and suppress their opponent. The sword essence ocean that swept out of Fan Jianxian was clearly a sword world. Fan Jianxian, he had already formed his own sword world? Jian Wushuang also felt rather stunned. He had studied Purple Blood Saint's understanding of sword principles in detail and knew how difficult it was to build his own sword world. According to the Purple Blood Saint's words, Sword World was extremely difficult to develop even among ultimate gods. There were only a few people who could barely develop their own sword world. All of them had very strong capabilities and were extremely talented in sword principles. However, Jian Wushuang had not expected Fan Jianxian to have that kind of capability. Boom, in the sword world, Fan Jianxian was its dictator. The infinite sword essences that filled up the surroundings suddenly pressed towards Jian Wushuang in a frenzy when he directed with his finger. The kind of pressure was different from those of regular domain secret techniques. Regular domain tactics only suppressed the opponent's abilities by limiting his speed and etc. However, Sword World's pressure was a kind of oppression. The type of oppression imposed directly on the opponent's body and mind with a huge deterrence effect. With the Sword World's oppression, Jian Wushuang felt an uncontrollable fear deep in his heart. That fear had caused him to have great trouble gathering divine power, sword essences, and using various tactics. Due to that reason, his abilities had decreased in an instant, especially on his sword techniques. If a sword cultivator was oppressed by the sword world, the effects on him would be strengthened. However, at the same time he was being oppressed by the sword world, a thought came to Jian Wushuang. This feeling doesn't feel right. This sword world, Jian Wushuang began to scrutinize and investigate the sword world. Die, kid! Fan Jianxian did not leave any leeway for Jian Wushuang's investigation. As soon as the sword world started oppressing Jian Wushuang, he appeared right away. The infinite ocean of sword essence suddenly retreated to the side following the sound of great waves, while Fan Jianxian, who was standing in between them, completely turned into a sharp blade that could pierce through the heavens. He ignored all obstructions and pierced through the void. End by Emperor. Whoosh! An overbearing sword essence swept up. It felt so natural for Fan Jianxian when he issued that strike, since he was the dictator of that sword world after all. A terrifying sword shadow appeared out of thin air, as it seemed it was going to cut open space. Every object that it passed through was dissolved. All the cultivators surrounding the battlefield were completely captivated by that incomparably domineering and overbearing sword shadow. Their eyes grew wide from shock. Watching the domineering sword shadow cutting towards him, Jian Wushuang squinted before releasing a surging of explosive divine powers from his body. While forcing himself to endure the sword world's oppression, Jian Wushuang raised his Blood Mountain sword once again and swung it. His sword's plain swing did not cause any effects to the void in front of him. Everything was incredibly calm. However, it was in such calmness that a traceless sword shadow suddenly slashed open the void. Ring! A huge sword light appeared. It looked as though the sword light had connected both heaven and earth. It was extremely bright and blinding to the eyes. When it appeared, it had become the focal point of heaven and earth. It even became eternal. The various sex experts who were scattered around the battlefield could not help but be mesmerized by the sword light. The strike was so beautiful. Throughout the oceans and wilderness, heaven and earth aligned. The incomparably domineering sword shadow made contact with the sword light and became the eternal heaven and earth. Boom! With a huge rumble, the terrifying impact of residual energies began to spread maniacally. Heaven and earth were shaking along with the sword essence ocean that filled every corner. It seemed like all of them could not withstand the incredible collision. The sword essences which were surrounding both of them also began to falter. After the collision, whoosh! A figure embarrassingly dashed outwards. The dash sent him to the sword essence ocean's edge before he would barely stop his momentum. That figure was none other than Jian Wushuang. Under the sword world's great oppression, he was at an obvious disadvantage during the clash. Even so, Jian Wushuang did not show any signs of disappointment. On the contrary, he wore a happy smile. I see, Fan Jianxian. I've overestimated you. Jian Wushuang's laughter was resonating between heaven and earth. I was shocked, as I thought the sword world you unleashed was a complete one. However, it seems that the sword world you formed was only a shell of the actual thing. Although it contains a few oppressive functions, It's still a far cry from the real sword world. I had felt it was impossible. You possessed that kind of sword principle understanding, and you have proven so now. You simply haven't reached the level of sword world. In fact, you're still pretty far from it. My guess is you have personally experienced other sword experts displaying their sword worlds to oppress you. Hence you learned to build a shell of it all by yourself. Fan Jianxian's face turned stern and said coldly, "Even if it's just a shell, it's still enough to oppress you. Is that so?" Jian Wushuang smirked. Ring ring. An extremely strong sword essence suddenly rose from Jian Wushuang's body. The sword essence began sweeping violently in every direction, pushing away the infinite sword essence ocean around it. As it got pushed away, the suppression effect on him had decreased quite a bit despite Jian Wushuang still somewhat being oppressed by it. "I'm not going to waste time on you any further. Let's decide who's the victor now," said Jian Wushuang coldly. "Come at me then. Why? Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Fan Jianxian showed no fear. He was a well-respected ultimate god with extremely overpowered abilities and had absolute confidence in his sword world. Boom! Fan Jianxian suddenly took a big leap. As he leaped out, the infinite sword essences focused at a single point. Fan Jianxian's eyes were projecting a thick light of essence. The green-colored long sword in his grip had lashed out. Broom boom boom. Heaven and earth turned dark as the void around them trembled and rose up. A gigantic green-colored sword shadow began enlarging in front of everyone's eyes, covering both sky and sun. In the end, it shrouded half of the void. Infinite god powers and sword essences gathered within the green-colored sword shadow. As the green-colored sword shadow appeared, all those sex experts looked desperate. That's way too strong. That energy was unbelievably strong. With energies as such, this might be Fan Jianxian's strongest strike. Many were exclaiming in awe. Yes, the strongest strike. Fan Jianxian had unleashed his maximum abilities as the #1 sword cultivator of Wuxia wilderness. As the overbearing green sword shadow was forming, Jian Wushuang only smiled faintly. His right hand, which gripped on Blood Mountain sword, tightened up slightly. Surging divine powers were swiftly charging into the sword. At that moment, Jian Wushuang also raised his divine power to his limits. He had become a perfect chaotic creature when he advanced from the chaotic realm to second-class divine demon, during which his divine powers were refined from his transcendence and morphing. In addition, the divine powers in his primordial void celestial body had also been increased. When he completely unleashed his divine power, Jian Wushuang would not be weaker than a regular ultimate god. In fact, he even felt that his divine power could be slightly stronger than regular ultimate gods. Due to that fact, he had held back his divine power and only unleashed 70% of it when clashing with Fan Jianxian a while ago. However, he was currently unleashing 100% of it. Surging divine powers were charging the Blood Mountain sword and causing it to begin trembling violently and became extremely blood-red. Jian Wushuang stared intensely at the green sword shadow wall coming toward him while he was raising the Blood Mountain sword. A terrifying hatred was gathering in his sword. "I just created this strike not long ago and hasn't shown it to anyone. You'll be its test subject today." Jian Wushuang's voice was cold as ice as the energies in Blood Mountain sword were charged to its limit. In the blink of an eye, the wide-spanning transmigration law power began to burst out. Transmigration sword technique, hateful path toward heaven. Boom! The Blood Mountain sword swung downwards. The swing had sliced the void into two halves. Hate! 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 The sword light that was filled with an infinite hatred willfully swept across the void. Sword essences filled everywhere it passed by as if it had paved the entire way to heaven. Hateful path toward heaven was a move Jian Wushuang created while studying Feng Tian scroll. It was also the third move in his transmigration sword technique after Endless Cycle and Samsara Empty Strike. It was also the debut of that move. A sword light that was filled with hatred stunned everyone as soon as it appeared, under the watching eyes of countless experts around. The magnificent hatred-filled sword light clashed head-on with the wave-like green sword shadow that was pressing in. For a moment, it looked like two entire worlds had collided. What came with it was an earth-shattering boom. The infinite sword essences and divine powers expanded violently towards every direction. The heavens were screaming while the earth was shaking. A divine power windstorm suddenly swept up which reached far and wide. It shrouded the entire battlefield in a force that could destroy heaven and earth. Retreat. Let's retreat quickly. Back off as far as we can, hurry. The experts' disciples from various sects who were standing around the battlefield retreated in fear. Many pairs of fearful eyes stared at the divine power windstorm on the battlefield and were gasping in awe. It was way too powerful. For those first-class and peak divine demons, an ultimate god's ability was way too strong, such that it was horrifying and suffocating. Fan Jianxian's ability was to be expected, but I didn't expect Jian Wushuang could be this strong as well, someone exclaimed. A while ago, all of them had the idea of killing Jian Wushuang. However, at that point, many sects have given up on that notion. Obviously, none of the Wuxia wilderness sects would take experts with an ultimate god's battle strength lightly. Even Narcissus Island, one of the top 10 sects, only had one known ultimate god was the Lord of Narcissus. In the other sects, many did not even have an ultimate god in residence. Therefore, however much they hated Jian Wushuang, they would not pick a fight with an expert possessing an ultimate god's battle strength. Ring, 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 the heaven and earth finally calmed down. The overbearing divine power windstorm had also died down gradually, revealing what was supposed to be the battlefield. However, the previously flat battlefield grounds had disappeared and was replaced with what appeared to be huge craters left behind by the sweeping divine power. A figure stood on each end of the battlefield. Naturally, they were Jian Wushuang and Fan Jianxian. They stared at each other from either end of the battlefield with extremely cold expressions. Has a conclusion been determined yet? Who won and lost exactly? Those sex experts stood around the battlefield and stared at both of them. If it was in the past, they would assume Fan Jianxian was the winner without a doubt. He was a widely recognized true ultimate god and the top-ranking sword cultivator with an incredible reputation after all. Regardless of how strong Jian Wushuang could be, he was probably only in the divine demon realm in the end. However, as the battle carried on to that point, nobody could be certain about Fan Jianxian being the victor anymore. The battle strength that Jian Wushuang displayed was truly not below that of Fan Jianxian. Everyone stared at both of them as the battlefield quieted down. Right at that moment, there were some slight changes to Jian Wushuang's expression. The corner of his lips curved slightly upwards as he wore a mysterious smile. The number 1 sword cultivator of Wuxia wilderness is only so-so. Right when his voice faded. Ah! A big gulp of blood shot out of Fan Jianxian's mouth and spilled all over the ground. Fan Jianxian was pale to begin, but his face had turned deadly white now. The breath of his divine power had also sharply decreased. The sight of that shuddered everyone on the scene. He lost. Fan Jianxian has been defeated. The number 1 sword cultivator actually lost to Jian Wushuang, who was still merely a divine demon? Oh heavens! From today onwards, the title of Wuxia Wilderness's number 1 sword cultivator would have to change its owner. The experts were wearing all kinds of expressions on their faces, with many of them feeling agitated. Fan Jianxian had become a legend very early on. However, someone had stepped violently on the legend that day. By stepping on the legend himself, he became the new number 1 sword cultivator. It was none other than Jian Wushuang. How's that possible? Long Zishan, Yu Ouching, and many people from Narcissus Island were all shocked beyond words. They almost could not believe what they had just witnessed. Especially Narcissus Island's Elder Lingyi and the 7th Elder. They secretly felt regretful for agreeing with the Lord's decision to abandon Jian Wushuang now. However, it was too late. On the edge of the battlefield, although Fan Jianxian was badly injured, he was not dead yet. He stuffed 2 elixirs into his mouth, and as those elixirs went down, the paleness on his face slightly faded away. Afterward, he once again looked at Jian Wushuang with mixed feelings. Unexpectedly, you don't only have an incredibly deep understanding of space-time law. Your understanding of transmigration law was not bad either and had reached the first stage. In addition, that strike which you created by combining transmigration law and your own sword skill was truly powerful. Fan Jianxian was extraordinarily skillful with the sword, but even he had to admit the strike Jian Wushuang last shown was truly remarkable and strong. Judging purely from the power of that final strike, it was even slightly stronger than his own most powerful strike. I have nothing to say about losing to you. From now on, the number 1 sword cultivator of Wuxia Wilderness is you. Fan Jianxian seemed to have lost all his pride as an ultimate god expert before Jian Wushuang. The number 1 sword cultivator of Wuxia Wilderness, haha. I have no interest whatsoever in this title. By the way, aren't you sending messages for reinforcement? There's no need to hide. Just take out the message token and do it. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly with an air of jest. Fan Jianxian's face changed right away, as it was exactly what he was doing, secretly sending messages for other supreme elders to come. As for what he said, that was just to distract Jian Wushuang. Unexpectedly, Jian Wushuang had read his mind. What surprised Fan Jianxian was, Jian Wushuang remained calm as usual without any thoughts of escaping even after knowing he was summoning reinforcement. Where did his self-confidence come from?